power does not ask permission. It takes what it needs or it dies waiting. Duke Cedric Thornville learned this truth at 14 when assassins murdered his father in the Grand Hall while courtiers pretended not to hear the screams. He learned it again at 16 when his mother drank poison rather than watch rival houses carve up their lands. And he learned it one final time at 18 when he executed every conspirator personally, including his father's most trusted advisor, because mercy was just another word for weakness waiting to destroy you. Now at 32, he ruled the Northern Reach with a grip so absolute that men whispered his name like a curse they were afraid to finish. They called him the Iron Duke, the Butcher of Thornvale, the man who ended the Crimson Rebellion by burning 3 castles to ash with everyone still inside. He never denied the accusations because denial suggested shame, and shame was what weak men felt when they failed to protect what mattered. Cedric protected everything: his lands, his people, his borders, and most importantly, the fortress walls around his own humanity before anyone could find a crack and wedge themselves inside. But isolation was its own form of prison, and even iron eventually rusts. This is the story of how one woman proved that sometimes the most dangerous weapon is not fear, but the absence of it. Stay until the end, because what happens in the throne room will rewrite everything you think you understand about power and the men who cannot survive without it. The first snow of November fell across Thornvale Castle like a shroud covering something already dead. Cedric stood alone in the war room, one hand pressed against the stone windowsill, watching the white flakes drift past iron-barred glass. Behind him, the massive oak table bore maps marked with troop movements, supply routes, and territorial disputes that needed resolution before winter locked the mountain passes shut. Candles burned in their sconces, casting long shadows across tactical diagrams that represented hundreds of lives he controlled with nothing more than a signature and a seal. His steward, Aldrich, entered without knocking because after 20 years of service, he had earned that privilege. Aldrich was 60, gray-haired, and one of the few men left alive who remembered Cedric as a boy before the murders turned him into something else. He carried a leather portfolio tucked under one arm, and his expression suggested the news inside would not improve anyone's evening. "The Parliament emissaries arrived an hour ago," Aldrich said quietly. "They are waiting in the Eastern Gallery." Cedric did not turn from the window. "Let them wait longer." "Your Grace, they traveled 4 days through early storms to... Then another hour will not kill them." Aldrich said nothing for a moment. The candles flickered. Outside, the wind picked up, driving snow against the glass, hard enough to make a sound like fingernails scratching for entry. "There is another matter," Aldrich continued carefully. "Lady Isolde Carvani's carriage will arrive before midnight." Now Cedric turned. His face was the kind that made artists frustrated because it refused to be just one thing. Sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw suggested aristocratic breeding, but the scar cutting through his left eyebrow and the permanent coldness in his gray eyes promised violence without hesitation. He wore black, always black, fitted close enough to move fast but expensive enough to remind everyone exactly who held power in this room. "I did not approve her travel north," Cedric said, his voice carrying the flat calm of a man who expected immediate obedience and rarely experienced disappointment. "Her father sent word 3 weeks ago. The official reason is a diplomatic visit to strengthen ties between... The official reason is horseshit. Carvane is trying to marry his daughter into my household before someone else claims the alliance." "Would that be so terrible?" Cedric crossed the room to the table, fingers trailing across the map of his territories. Thornvale. Ashwood. The Frozen Marches. Land his family bled for across 6 generations. Land he killed for personally. Land that would pass to no one if he died without an heir, and every noble family with an unmarried daughter knew it. "Marriage is a transaction," Cedric said, "and I do not make transactions that benefit the other party more than myself." "Then send her away when she arrives." "No." Cedric straightened, decision made. "Let her come. Let her see Thornvale in winter when the storms hit and the castle feels like a tomb. Let her eat dinner with me while I discuss crop failures and troop deployments and everything else that bores women raised in southern comfort. By the time spring comes, she will beg her father to find her someone less exhausting." Aldrich almost smiled. "You are cruel, Your Grace." "I am efficient." The older man moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the iron latch. The emissaries will not leave without an audience. Good. Fear and discomfort make men honest. I will see them in an hour. After Aldrich left, Cadric remained standing at the table, staring at the maps, but seeing something else entirely. Memory was a curse that way. It waited until you were alone, then dragged you backward into moments you spent years trying to bury. He remembered the grand hall on the night his father died, remembered the way blood looked spreading across marble floors, remembered his mother's face 3 months later when she decided dying was easier than surviving. And he remembered most of all the exact moment he stopped being a grieving boy and became something colder, harder, infinitely more dangerous. Power was not something you chose. Power was what remained after everything softer burned away. A knock interrupted the silence. "Enter," Cadric called without looking up. The door opened and Captain Thorne stepped inside, snow still dusting his dark cloak. Thorne commanded Thornvale's military garrison and reported directly to the Duke, bypassing every political layer that slowed down necessary violence. He was 40, scarred across both hands from sword work, and utterly loyal because Cadric once killed 3 men trying to assassinate him during a border dispute. Loyalty purchased with blood lasted longer than loyalty purchased with gold. "Patrol reports," Thorne said, moving to the table. "Bandits hit 2 supply wagons on the northern road. 4 guards dead. They took grain, medical supplies, and a strongbox containing tax collection from Millbrook." "How many bandits?" "Tracks suggest 8 to 10. Cadric leaned forward, studying the map. "Millbrook is 12 miles from the forest border. They hit the wagons and vanished into the trees before anyone could respond. Standard ambush tactics. They have been getting bolder. Because they think I am distracted by parliament politics and marriage negotiations." Cadric tapped the map where the road cut through dense woodland. "How long would it take to position 50 men in concealment along this route?" Thorne calculated quickly. 2 days if we move at night." "Do it. Spread word through the villages that another tax shipment will travel the northern road in 4 days. Make sure the information reaches the taverns where loose tongues wag. When the bandits move to intercept, we close the trap and kill every single one." "No prisoners?" "No prisoners. I want their bodies displayed at every crossroads between here and the forest. Let everyone see what happens when you steal from me." Thorne nodded. No hesitation, no moral discomfort. "It will be done, Your Grace." After the captain left, Cadric poured himself whiskey from a crystal decanter, the amber liquid catching candlelight as it filled the glass. He drank slowly, feeling the burn spread through his chest, momentarily warming the cold machinery inside him that passed for emotions. Cruelty was just preemptive protection. You hurt them first, hurt them badly enough that no one else tried. Eventually, the violence became its own deterrent, and the killing could stop, except it never really stopped. The Parliament emissaries looked exactly like every other delegation of soft-handed aristocrats who traveled north thinking they could manipulate the Iron Duke through political pressure and veiled threats. They gathered in the Eastern Gallery, a long room lined with portraits of dead Thornvales, all watching from their frames with the same cold eyes that Cadric inherited. 3 men, dressed in expensive coats with fur trim, their cheeks still ruddy from the journey. Cadric recognized Lord Pemberton, a minor landholder with major ambitions. The other 2 were younger, probably sons sent to observe negotiations and learn how power moved between men who pretended civilization mattered. Cadric entered without announcement, Aldrich trailing behind him. The emissaries stood quickly, arranging their faces into expressions of respect that did not quite reach their eyes. "Your Grace," Pemberton began, bowing precisely the correct depth. "We are grateful for You are not here out of gratitude," Cadric interrupted, moving to the head of the room where a heavy chair sat on a raised platform. He did not sit. "You are here because Parliament believes they can pressure me into supporting the King's new taxation reforms by sending representatives during storm season when travel makes me their captive audience." Silence fell across the gallery like a blade. Pemberton recovered first, smoothing his expression into diplomatic neutrality. "Your Grace, the King's reforms are intended to strengthen the kingdom's economy, and the King's reforms are intended to strip northern territories of autonomy and funnel our resources south to pay for his mistress and her growing collection of palaces." Cadric's voice remained flat, clinical. devoid of anger because anger implied caring. You think I do not receive reports? You think I do not know how much gold flows into the capital while border defenses crumble and villages starve during bad harvests? One of the younger men shifted uncomfortably. The Crown has offered substantial support for infrastructure development in promises. Kedrick finally sat, the chair creaking under his weight. Words written on parchment by men who have never seen a battlefield or watched their people freeze because tax collectors took the last of the winter stores. I rule the North. I protect the North. And I will not sacrifice Northern lives for Southern greed regardless of how many emissaries Parliament sends. Pemberton's diplomatic mask cracked slightly. Your Grace, defying the Crown openly would be unwise. There are consequences to... Do not threaten me in my own castle, Pemberton. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Kedrick leaned forward, elbows on his knees, gray eyes locked on the older man's face. You traveled 4 days to remind me that kings have armies and nobles who defy them end up dispossessed or dead. I already know this. What you apparently do not know is that I command 6,000 men who are loyal to me personally, not to a crown that has done nothing for them except demand more gold and more blood. You do not frighten me. Parliament does not frighten me. And the king certainly does not frighten me because we both understand that if he moves against Thornville, half the northern houses will rise in rebellion, and he will spend the next decade fighting a civil war he cannot afford. Your Grace, I am not finished. Kedrick stood, and 3 grown men instinctively stepped backward. You will return to Parliament and deliver this message exactly as I speak it. The North will contribute to the kingdom's economy at rates we determine, not rates dictated by Southern bureaucrats. Our borders will remain under our control. Our taxes will fund our defenses first. And if the king believes he can force different terms, he is welcome to march his army north and see how that turns out. Complete silence. Pemberton looked like a man who just watched his entire mission collapse into disaster. Your Grace, please understand that. I understand perfectly. Now get out of my castle. The emissaries left quickly, their footsteps echoing down the corridor like retreating drumbeats. Aldrich remained behind, closing the gallery doors before turning to face Kedrick with an expression somewhere between admiration and concern. That may have been unnecessarily aggressive, Your Grace. It was necessarily clear. The king will not take this well. The king will posture and make noise and ultimately do nothing because he needs the North more than we need him. Kedrick walked to the window, watching snow continue to fall. Power is not about what you do. It is about what everyone believes you will do. They need to believe I would burn this kingdom to ash before I bend. And would you? Kedrick did not answer immediately. Outside, lights flickered in the castle courtyard, where guards changed shifts and servants hurried through the cold. His people, his responsibility, his burden to carry alone because trusting anyone else meant giving them a weapon to destroy you. I would do whatever was necessary, he finally said, without hesitation, without regret. Aldrich nodded slowly. Lady Isolde will arrive within the hour. Then prepare the great hall. Let us see if Lord Carvane's daughter is as resilient as her father thinks. The great hall of Thornville Castle was designed to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings rose 30 feet overhead, supported by columns carved with battle scenes from wars most people forgot. Banners hung from iron chains, their colors faded by time and smoke. At the far end, a massive fireplace burned logs thick as a man's torso, throwing heat and shadow across the stone floor. The high table sat on a raised dais, positioned so whoever sat there looked down on everyone else. Kedrick took his place there, Aldrich standing slightly behind his right shoulder. Servants moved efficiently, setting plates and goblets with practiced silence. The meal would be simple: roasted venison, winter vegetables, dark bread. Nothing extravagant because extravagance suggested trying to impress. And Kedrick had no interest in impressing anyone. Doors at the far end opened. Lady Isolde Carvan entered, and Kedrick's first thought was that her father had made a tactical error sending her north. She was beautiful, but that was expected. Every noble daughter sent to secure political marriages knew how to dress, how to smile, how to arrange their face into whatever expression men found most appealing. What surprised him was the intelligence visible in her dark eyes as she crossed the hall, taking in every detail with the focused assessment of someone trained to notice weakness. She wore deep blue velvet despite the cold, her dark hair pulled back to expose a face with sharp cheekbones and full lips, currently curved into a polite smile that revealed absolutely nothing about what she was thinking. 2 handmaids followed her, both young, both terrified. Kedrick did not stand. Isolde reached the dais, stopped precisely the correct distance away, and curtsied with textbook perfection. "Your Grace, thank you for receiving me on such short notice." Her voice was cultured, smooth, completely controlled. Kedrick gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." She climbed the dais steps, settled into the chair with practiced grace, and folded her hands in her lap while her handmaids retreated to stand against the far wall. Servants brought food, poured wine, then vanished. For a long moment, neither spoke. Kedrick ate methodically, studying her between bites. She did not fidget, did not rush to fill the silence with nervous conversation, did not look away when their eyes met across the table. Most women sent to charm him either tried too hard or wilted under the weight of his attention. Isolde did neither. "Your journey was difficult," Kedrick finally said. "Roads in November are always difficult, Your Grace." "Then why risk them?" "Because my father believes an alliance between our houses would benefit both parties." "Your father believes correctly. The question is whether I agree." Isolde took a sip of wine, her expression still pleasant, still revealing nothing. "And do you?" "I think your father wants access to northern trade routes and military support if his southern rivals move against him. I think he calculated that sending his unmarried daughter to Thornvale during winter would force me into a decision before spring brought other options." Kedrick leaned back in his chair. "I think he underestimated how little I care about his political problems." Something flickered behind Isolde's eyes. Anger, maybe, or respect. "Your Grace is very direct." "I am efficient. Courtship rituals bore me." "Then let me be equally direct." She set down her goblet, spine straight, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I am here because my father commanded it. I am 24 years old. I have been trained since childhood to manage a noble household, navigate court politics, and produce heirs. I speak 4 languages. I understand military logistics and economic theory. I do not expect love. I do not expect kindness. I expect respect and a position of influence appropriate to my station." Kedrick almost smiled. "You negotiate like a general." "I negotiate like a woman who understands her value and refuses to pretend otherwise." "And what exactly is your value, Lady Isolde?" "I am smart enough to help you and strong enough not to become a liability. I will not weep when you make brutal decisions. I will not faint at the sight of blood. I will not bore you with trivial concerns or burden you with emotional demands you cannot meet." She paused. "And I will never, ever mistake you for something you are not." "Which is?" "Redeemable." The word hung in the air between them like a blade balanced on its edge. Kedrick stared at her for a long moment, reassessing everything. Most women looked at him and saw either a monster to fear or a beast to tame. Isolde looked at him and saw exactly what he was, something too damaged to fix and too powerful to oppose. "You think you understand me," Kedrick said slowly. "I think you murdered 17 men the year you inherited your title. I think you burned those castles during the rebellion because strategic brutality ended the war faster than prolonged conflict. I think you are cold and ruthless and completely alone because those are the traits that kept you alive." Isolde leaned forward slightly. "And I think you are intelligent enough to recognize that a wife who understands all of this is infinitely more useful than one who does not." Silence stretched between them. Outside, wind hammered against the castle walls. The fire crackled. Servants waited in the shadows, invisible and silent. Kedrick picked up his goblet, drained the wine, then set it down with deliberate care. "You are staying 2 weeks. During that time, you will accompany me to council meetings, military briefings, and administrative reviews. You will see exactly what ruling the North requires. If at the end of 2 weeks you still believe you can handle this life, we will discuss terms." "And if I cannot?" Then you return south with my sincere recommendation that your father find you someone softer. Isolde's smile finally reached her eyes. I accept your challenge, Your Grace. It is not a challenge, Lady Isolde. It is a warning. The next morning arrived gray and bitter cold. Cedric woke before dawn, dressed in silence, and made his way to the castle battlements where he could watch the sun struggle to rise above frozen mountains. This was his ritual, his moment of privacy before the day filled with decisions that would impact hundreds of lives. Up here, alone, he could almost remember what it felt like to be something other than a weapon aimed at anyone who threatened his people. Almost. Footsteps on stone interrupted his solitude. Cedric turned to find Isolde climbing the last steps to the battlement, wrapped in a thick cloak, her breath misting in the frigid air. She stopped a respectful distance away, looking out at the same frozen landscape that surrounded Thornvale Castle, like a siege that never ended. You are awake early, Cedric observed. I do not sleep well in unfamiliar places. Most women would stay in bed until a more reasonable hour. Most women were not warned that Thornvale would test them. Isolde glanced at him. I assume this is part of the evaluation? Everything is part of the evaluation. She moved closer to the stone wall, looking down at the courtyard far below where guards drilled in formation despite the cold. Your men train before breakfast. Discipline does not wait for comfort. Is that how you see leadership? Discipline enforced through discomfort? I see leadership as doing what is necessary regardless of how it makes me feel. Cedric joined her at the wall. Comfort is the first step toward complacency. Complacency gets people killed. Isolde said nothing for a moment, just watched the soldiers move through their formations with mechanical precision. You trust them. I trust their training. That is not the same thing. No, Cedric agreed. It is not. They stood in silence as the sun finally broke above the mountain ridge, pale and cold, offering light but no warmth. Cedric found himself studying Isolde's profile, the way she watched his soldiers with the same analytical focus she turned on everything. She was evaluating him just as carefully as he evaluated her, cataloging strengths and weaknesses, calculating advantages. It should have annoyed him. Instead, it felt oddly familiar. Your father taught you to think strategically, Cedric said. My father taught me that survival requires understanding power and the men who wield it. And what do you understand about me? Isolde turned to face him fully, dark eyes meeting his without hesitation. I understand that you are terrified. Every muscle in Cedric's body went rigid. Excuse me? You heard me correctly, Your Grace. Isolde's voice remained calm, matter of fact. You built this fortress of discipline and brutality because you are absolutely terrified of being vulnerable again. Every decision you make, every person you keep at distance, every emotion you refuse to feel, all of it is armor against the possibility that someone might hurt you the way you were hurt when your parents died. Cedric's hand moved to the hilt of his sword, pure instinct, before he forced himself to stop. You are dangerously close to overstepping, Lady Isolde. I am answering the question you asked. I asked what you understand about power. And I am telling you, real power is not forcing people to obey through fear. Real power is having something worth protecting and being strong enough to protect it. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see gold flecks in her dark eyes. You think your isolation makes you strong. It makes you brittle. One good hit in the right place and you will shatter. For a moment, one dangerous, unguarded moment, Cedric wanted to throw her off the battlement just to prove she was wrong. Then the moment passed, and he was left standing in the cold with the uncomfortable realization that she might be right. You know nothing about me, he said quietly. I know enough. Isolde pulled her cloak tighter, but I am willing to learn more. That is why I am here. She turned and walked back toward the stairs, leaving Cedric alone on the battlements with the rising sun and the sudden, unwelcome feeling that he had made a serious miscalculation inviting her to stay. The 2 weeks that followed were brutal in ways neither anticipated. Cedric kept his word. Isolde attended every meeting, every briefing, every moment of the grinding administrative work that kept the North functioning. She sat silent in the corner while he negotiated border disputes with petty lords who tested his patience. She watched him sentence criminals to execution without hesitation. She reviewed food stores and tax records and military deployment orders until her eyes burned from reading by candlelight, and she never once flinched. On the 5th day, he took her to witness the aftermath of the bandit trap. 50 bodies hung from crossroads gibbets, frozen solid, their faces twisted in final agony. Kedrick watched her carefully, waiting for the inevitable horror, the tears, the realization that she could not handle this life. Isolde walked among the dead without expression, then turned to him. Necessary brutality or excessive cruelty? Does it matter? It matters to me. Kedrick considered the question. They killed 4 of my men and stole resources needed for winter survival. I made an example so others would not make the same mistake. Excessive? Perhaps, but effective. And how many innocent people will die because you taught everyone in the North to fear you more than they trust you? The question landed like a punch. Trust is a luxury I cannot afford, Kedrick said. No, trust is a weapon you refuse to use because you are afraid it will be turned against you. Isolde looked back at the hanging bodies. Fear works until someone finds a way to make people more afraid of not fighting you. They rode back to Thornvale in silence. On the 8th day, Aldrich fell ill. It started as a cough, worsened to fever, and by evening the old steward was bedridden, his breathing labored and wet. The castle physician examined him, then delivered his assessment with the kind of carefully neutral expression that always preceded bad news. His lungs are filling with fluid, Your Grace. At his age, the likelihood of recovery is... The physician trailed off diplomatically. Kedrick stood at the foot of Aldrich's bed, watching the man who raised him struggle to breathe. What can be done? Keep him warm, make him comfortable. Pray. I do not pray. Then there is nothing more to do but wait, Your Grace. After the physician left, Kedrick pulled a chair to the bedside and sat. Aldrich's eyes were closed, his weathered face slack. For 20 years, this man served him loyally, never questioning, never judging, always there when needed. And now he was dying because lungs eventually failed and medicine had limits. Kedrick found himself hoping Aldrich would wake up one more time, just so he could say the words he never knew how to speak while time remained. The door opened quietly. Isolde entered, carrying a basin of water and clean cloths. She moved to the other side of the bed without asking permission, dipping a cloth in water and gently pressing it to Aldrich's fevered forehead. You do not need to be here, Kedrick said. I know. He is not your responsibility. Neither are you, yet here I am. Kedrick watched her work, efficient and calm, treating the dying steward with more gentleness than he had seen her display toward anyone. Why? Because someone should. Isolde refreshed the cloth. And because I think you need to see that caring for people does not make you weak. It makes you vulnerable. Yes, it does. She looked up, meeting his eyes across the bed. But vulnerability is not the same thing as weakness, Your Grace. The strongest people I have ever known were the ones brave enough to care despite knowing how badly it could hurt. Aldrich died 3 hours later, his breathing simply stopping between one moment and the next. Kedrick sat motionless, staring at the old man's face, feeling something crack open inside his chest that he thought he had sealed shut permanently. Grief was supposed to be weakness. Caring was supposed to be dangerous. Yet sitting here in the darkness, watching the only father figure he had left slip away, Kedrick felt something worse than weakness. He felt alone. Isolde's hand settled gently on his shoulder. He should have pushed her away. Should have stood up and walked out and buried the emotion before it could take root. Instead, he stayed exactly where he was, accepting comfort from a woman he barely knew because the alternative was facing this moment completely isolated. I am sorry, Isolde said quietly. Kedrick did not answer. Could not answer. The words were stuck somewhere behind the iron walls he built around himself, trapped along with every other feeling he refused to acknowledge. They sat together in silence until dawn. The funeral was simple because Aldrich requested simplicity in his will. They buried him in the castle cemetery, a small plot overlooking the northern valley where graves of previous Thornvales and their loyal servants stretched back generations. Snow fell throughout the ceremony, accumulating on the rough wooden casket before they lowered it into frozen ground. Kedrick stood at the graveside, dressed in black, face expressionless, while a priest recited prayers he did not listen to. Around him, servants and soldiers gathered to pay respects to a man who served House Thornvale for 2 decades. They wept quietly. They embraced each other. They grieved openly. Kedrick felt nothing. Or rather, he felt everything and chose to show nothing, because showing anything was admitting that people mattered, and if people mattered, then losing them destroyed you. After the priest finished, people began dispersing back toward the castle. Isolde remained beside him, waiting patiently while snow continued to fall. "You should return inside," Kedrick said. "You will freeze. So will you. I do not feel the cold." "That is a lie." Isolde turned to face him. "You feel everything. You just pretend you do not, because pretending is easier than dealing with the pain." Kedrick looked at her, this woman who appeared in his life barely 2 weeks ago and somehow managed to see through defenses that took him years to construct. "You think you understand me after 14 days? I think I understand what it means to build walls so high that no one can reach you and then wonder why you are always alone. I chose to be alone. No one chooses that, Your Grace. Some of us just run out of people we trust not to hurt us." The words hit harder than any blade. Kedrick stared at Aldrich's grave, watching snow slowly cover the disturbed earth. He thought about the promise he made himself at 18, that he would never care about anyone enough to be destroyed by their loss again. He thought about the decades spent enforcing that promise, turning himself into something cold and efficient and utterly isolated. And he thought about the fact that despite everything, losing Aldrich hurt exactly as badly as he always feared it would. "He was the last person who remembered me before," Kedrick said quietly. "Before what?" "Before I became this." Isolde moved closer, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You can still be something else. It is not too late." "Yes, it is." Kedrick finally looked at her. "I have done things that cannot be undone. Killed people who deserved mercy. Ruled through fear because fear was efficient. You were right the other day. I am not redeemable." "I never said you were not redeemable. I said you were not interested in redemption." Isolde reached up, her gloved hand cupping his jaw, forcing him to maintain eye contact. "There is a difference, Your Grace. One is about what you can become. The other is about what you refuse to try." Something shifted in that moment, something dangerous and terrifying and completely outside Kedrick's control. He kissed her. Not gently, not with any romance or careful seduction. He kissed her like a man who spent 14 years refusing to feel anything and suddenly could not maintain the discipline any longer. His hands gripped her shoulders, pulling her closer, and when she responded, when she kissed him back with equal intensity, it felt like the walls he spent so long building finally cracked wide enough to let something through. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, snow falling around them like the world trying to cover up what just happened, Kedrick realized he made a catastrophic mistake. He let her in. "And people who got inside could destroy you from within. This cannot happen," he said, stepping back. Isolde looked at him with eyes that saw too much. "It already did." "I do not—" Kedrick stopped, searching for words that could rebuild the walls fast enough. "I cannot afford to care about you. Too late for that, too." "Isolde, do you want me to leave?" She asked it plainly, no manipulation, no games. "Because I will, if you truly want me gone. But I think you are more afraid of me staying than you are of anything else in your life." Kedrick stared at her, mind racing through calculations and strategies and every defense mechanism he developed over the years. She was right. He was terrified, not of her specifically, but of what she represented: connection, vulnerability, the possibility that he might actually need someone. Before he could answer, Captain Thorne appeared at the cemetery entrance, his expression grim. "Your Grace, you need to come immediately." The moment shattered. Kedrick moved into commander mode instantly. Emotions locked away again. Walls rebuilt. "What happened?" "Messenger from the capital. The king is dead." Thorne's voice was steady, but his eyes held the kind of caution that preceded civil wars. "And Parliament has declared Lord Morcant the new regent until the prince comes of age." Every calculation in Kaedric's mind shifted. Morkant, the exile, the man who tried to overthrow the crown 10 years ago and vanished when the coup failed. Now he was back, holding the regency, commanding the crown's armies, and the first thing a man like Morkant would do was eliminate threats to his power. Kaedric looked at Isolde, still standing in the snow, and knew with absolute certainty that the kiss they just shared would be the last moment of peace either of them experienced for a very long time. "Get everyone inside," Kaedric ordered. "Full lockdown. No one enters or leaves Thornvale without my direct authorization. Double the guard rotations, and send ravens to every northern house. I want a complete accounting of their military strength and their position on the regency within 48 hours. Thorn saluted and ran. Isolde moved to Kaedric's side. "This is bad. This is worse than bad. This is the beginning of everything I spent 14 years trying to prevent." "Then what do we do?" Kaedric looked down at her, this woman who walked into his fortress planning to stay 2 weeks and instead witnessed him break every promise he made himself about isolation and emotional control. "We survive," he said, "no matter what it costs." They walked back to the castle together through falling snow while somewhere in the capital, a new regime consolidated power and made lists of everyone who needed to be destroyed before their rule could be secure. And Kaedric's name sat at the very top, the war room filled with tension thick enough to choke on. Kaedric stood at the head of the table, both hands pressed flat against maps that suddenly meant nothing compared to the political earthquake tearing through the kingdom. Around him, his northern allies arrived throughout the night, lords who controlled territories from the frozen marches to the coastal fortresses, each one calculating their survival odds now that Morkant held the regency. Lord Brennan spoke first, his weathered face tight with concern. 60 years old, veteran of 3 border wars, too experienced to panic, but too smart not to recognize disaster when it sat on the throne. The old man's voice carried across the stone chamber. "The king dies in his sleep, and within 6 hours, Morkant controls the capital. That is not coincidence. That is assassination." Proving assassination is irrelevant. Kaedric kept his tone flat, clinical. Morkant has the Crown Council's support. He has Parliament backing. He controls the royal treasury and the standing army. Whether he killed the king himself or just capitalized on opportunity, the result is identical. Lord Harwick, younger, angrier, less controlled, slammed his fist on the table hard enough to make candlesticks jump. "Then we march south and remove him before he consolidates power. We have the numbers. Combined northern forces outnumber the capital garrison 3-1. And by the time we march south, he will have hired mercenary companies from across the channel and fortified every approach to the capital." Kaedric traced routes on the map. "Open rebellion plays directly into his strategy. He wants us to move first so he can crush us as traitors and seize our territories legally." Silence fell like a hammer. Captain Thorne stood near the door, arms crossed, watching his duke navigate political waters more dangerous than any battlefield. "What do we do then? Wait for him to pick us off individually?" "We do exactly what he does not expect." Kaedric straightened, meeting the eyes of every man in the room. "We pledge loyalty to the regency." The explosion was immediate. Harwick shot to his feet. "You cannot be serious." "Sit down." Kaedric's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through flesh. "I said pledge loyalty. I did not say surrender. Morkant believes northern houses will either rebel immediately or fracture under pressure. Instead, we present a unified front of cooperation while simultaneously preparing for the war he will inevitably start." Brennan leaned forward, understanding dawning in his sharp eyes. "You buy time." "I buy time, and I force him to show his hand. If he accepts our loyalty, we gain months to fortify positions and secure alliances. If he rejects it and moves against us anyway, every house in the kingdom watches him destroy nobles who bent the knee. Either outcome weakens his legitimacy." The logic was sound, ruthless, calculating, and completely devoid of honor, but sound. Harwick sat slowly, jaw tight, with barely controlled fury. "And when he eventually comes for us anyway? Because men like Morkant always come for threats eventually." "Then we are ready." Kaedric's gray eyes held nothing but cold certainty. "And we make him bleed for every mile he advances north." The meeting continued for 3 more hours, working through logistics, supply chains, defensive positions, and contingency plans for when political strategy inevitably collapsed into violence. By the time the Northern Lords departed, dawn was breaking gray and cold over Thornvale's battlements. Cadric remained in the war room alone, staring at maps that represented thousands of lives about to be thrown into chaos because one man seized power and others had to respond or die. The door opened without knocking. Only one person in the castle would enter that way now that Aldrich was gone. Isolde crossed the room, carrying 2 cups of something that smelled like strong coffee mixed with honey. She set one in front of Cadric, then leaned against the table beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You have not slept," she observed. "Sleep is a luxury. Sleep is a necessity, even for men who think they are made of iron." Cadric picked up the cup, letting the warmth seep into his hands. "You should not be here. We established 2 days ago that telling me what I should do is ineffective." Despite everything, the political crisis, the looming war, the exhaustion pulling at his bones, Cadric almost smiled. Almost. He drank the coffee, feeling it burn down his throat. "Morcant will learn about you. He probably already knows. Then he will use you against me." Isolde turned to face him fully, dark eyes serious. "Is that what you think I am? A weakness he can exploit?" "You are a vulnerability I cannot afford." "No." Her voice went hard, sharp with an edge he had not heard before. "I am an asset you refuse to acknowledge, because acknowledging me means admitting you care about something other than control." The words landed like a physical blow. Cadric set down the cup carefully, buying time to reconstruct walls that kept crumbling every time she was near. Caring makes you predictable. Predictable makes you dead. Isolation makes you brittle. Brittle makes you breakable. Isolde moved closer, invading space he usually kept sacred. "You think pushing everyone away protects you. All it does is guarantee that when you finally fall, no one will be there to catch you." "I do not need catching." "Everyone needs catching eventually, Your Grace. Even you." Cadric stared at her, this woman who walked into his fortress and somehow dismantled defenses he spent 14 years perfecting. She was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with weapons or armies. She threatened something far more fundamental than his life. She threatened the absolute control that kept him functional. He reached up, fingers brushing her jaw, feeling her pulse jump under his touch. "You should leave Thornvale. Return south before the situation deteriorates further." "No." "Isolde, I said no, Cadric." She used his name for the first time. No title, no formality. "I am staying. You can order me to leave, but I will refuse. You can have your guards drag me out, but I will return. So either accept that I am here or waste energy fighting battles you cannot win." Something shifted in Cadric's chest, something that felt dangerously close to relief. He kissed her again, harder this time, pulling her against him with hands that knew how to command armies, but had forgotten how to hold another person. She responded with equal intensity, fingers gripping his shoulders. And for one stolen moment, the war and the politics and the constant grinding pressure of survival all fell away. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Cadric rested his forehead against hers. "This is a mistake." "Probably." Isolde's smile was small, genuine. "But I think you have earned a few mistakes, Your Grace." "I do not make mistakes." "Then call it a calculated risk." A knock interrupted them before Cadric could respond. They separated quickly, Isolde moving to the window while Cadric turned toward the door, expression locked back into the cold mask everyone expected. Captain Thorne entered, his face carrying news that clearly was not good. "Messenger just arrived from the capital. Official dispatch from the regent." Cadric took the sealed letter, broke the wax, and read quickly. Each word was carefully chosen political poison disguised as diplomatic courtesy. The message was simple and devastating. Regent Morcant requested Cadric's presence at court within 2 weeks to formally pledge loyalty and discuss the Northern Territory's role in the new administration. Failure to appear would be interpreted as treason against the crown. The prince's safety and the kingdom's stability depended on all noble houses demonstrating immediate cooperation. It was a trap disguised as an invitation. He wants you in the capital where he controls everything, Thorne said unnecessarily. He wants me off balance and exposed. Kedrick passed the letter to Isolde. If I refuse, he brands me a traitor and uses it to justify military action. If I accept, I walk into his domain surrounded by his soldiers. Isolde read the dispatch, her expression darkening. There is no good option here. No, there is only the option that gives us the most leverage. Kedrick moved to the window, watching morning light spread across the valley. I go to the capital. That is insane, Thorne said flatly. That is strategy. Morcon expects me to refuse or delay. Instead, I arrive early, publicly pledge loyalty, and force him to either accept my cooperation or reveal his intentions in front of the entire court. Kedrick turned back to face them. He cannot move openly against me without justification. Going to the capital removes his excuse. Isolde set down the letter. Unless he simply kills you the moment you arrive and claims you attacked him first. Then you ensure the entire kingdom knows the truth. Kedrick looked at her directly. I leave detailed documentation of everything. Troop positions, alliances, contingency plans. If I die, the northern houses rise immediately, and they have everything they need to coordinate resistance. You are talking about your own death very casually, Isolde said, and something in her voice made Kedrick's chest tighten. I am talking about survival. Mine, yours, and everyone who depends on Thornvale remaining strong. He crossed to her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. If Morcant kills me, the North will burn his regime to ash. That knowledge is what keeps me alive. Leverage through mutually assured destruction. And if he finds another way to neutralize you, prison, poison, something slower than outright assassination? Kedrick almost smiled, cold and sharp. Then I kill him first. 3 days later, Kedrick departed for the capital with an escort of 50 men and enough political baggage to sink kingdoms. Isolde stood in the courtyard watching preparations, her expression carefully neutral, while servants loaded supply wagons and soldiers checked weapons. She had argued against this plan for hours after the message arrived, presenting every tactical flaw and political danger with the systematic precision of someone who understood exactly how badly this could go wrong. Kedrick ignored all of it because sometimes survival required walking directly into the trap and betting you were faster than the jaws closing around you. He approached her now, dressed for travel in dark leather and wool, the kind of practical clothing that allowed quick movement without sacrificing the appearance of authority. His sword hung at his hip, visible, a reminder that dukes did not come unarmed, even to pledge loyalty. 2 weeks, Kedrick said. If I am not back in 2 weeks, assume the worst and execute the contingency plans. I will not need to assume. If you are not back in 2 weeks, I will come to the capital myself and burn it down looking for you. Something flickered in Kedrick's expression. You cannot. I can, and I will. Isolde stepped closer, voice dropping. You spent 14 years building walls to keep people out. Now you have let me in, and you do not get to die without consequences. Isolde, she kissed him, hard and fast, in front of 50 soldiers and a dozen servants, completely destroying any pretense that this was a purely political alliance. When she pulled back, her eyes were fierce. Come back alive, Kedrick. That is an order. For a moment, Kedrick forgot how to breathe. Then he recovered, nodded once, and swung into his saddle. Captain Thorne and the escort formed up around him, disciplined and ready. They rode out through Thornvale's gates as snow began falling again. Isolde watched until they disappeared into the forest, then turned and walked back inside the castle, her mind already working through scenarios and backup plans, because waiting passively for news was not something she knew how to do. Behind her, Thornvale's walls rose dark against gray sky, a fortress that had stood for 6 generations and would stand for 6 more if she had anything to say about it. The capital appeared on the horizon 4 days later, sprawling and chaotic and completely different from the rigid order Kedrick maintained in the north. Parliament buildings clustered around the royal palace like merchants crowding a marketplace. Streets twisted through residential districts where noble houses competed with elaborate architecture. The city walls were more decorative than defensive, built by people who forgot what real sieges looked like. Kedrick hated it immediately. They entered through the northern gate as sunset painted the sky red and gold. Citizens stopped to stare at the Iron Duke's procession, their faces carrying the kind of fascination usually reserved for predators caged in menageries. Word had spread that Caedric was coming. The entire capital held its breath waiting to see what happened when two apex predators occupied the same territory. The palace guards met them at the main square, 50 men in royal colors, their captain delivering Morcant's message with mechanical formality. Accommodations had been arranged. The Duke's audience with the regent would occur tomorrow at noon. Weapons were permitted, but bodyguards would remain outside the throne room during official meetings. Standard protocol that also guaranteed Caedric would face Morcant alone and surrounded. They were escorted to a residence in the noble quarter, a 3-story stone building with tall windows and excellent sight lines for anyone positioned across the street with a crossbow. Caedric's men swept the rooms thoroughly, checking for listening devices, hidden passages, and poison in the wine decanters. They found 2 listening tubes behind wall panels and a servant who ran when questioned. "He is watching everything," Thorn observed, examining the tubes. "Good. Let him watch." Caedric moved to the window overlooking the street. "I want 4 men on rotation watching that building across the way. 2 on the roof. Everyone else in full armor and ready to move. If this goes badly, we fight our way to the northern gate and do not stop until we reach friendly territory. And if it goes well? Then we still leave as quickly as possible because the capital is enemy ground regardless of how the meeting goes." That night, Caedric did not sleep. He sat in the study reviewing documents and contingency plans, burning candles down to stubs while his mind worked through political angles and violent alternatives. Outside, the capital celebrated something with fireworks and music, sounds drifting through windows like mockery of the tension coiling inside these walls. Caedric thought about Isolde standing in Thornvale's courtyard, issuing orders like a duchess despite holding no official title. He thought about the kiss she gave him in front of witnesses, publicly binding her reputation to his in ways that could destroy her if this went wrong. And he thought about the uncomfortable realization that for the first time in 14 years, he had something to lose that terrified him more than his own death. At midnight, footsteps approached his door. Caedric's hand moved to his sword before the knock came, soft and deliberate. "Enter." Captain Thorn stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "We have a problem." "Another one?" "Lord Brennan's son just arrived from the north. Urgent message." Thorn held out a sealed letter. "Regent Morcant sent soldiers to Harwick's territories 3 days ago. They burned 2 villages and arrested Lord Harwick on charges of sedition." The world tilted sideways. Caedric broke the seal and read quickly, feeling rage build with each word. Harwick had not even reached home after the Thornvale meeting before Morcant moved against him. The charges were fabricated nonsense about plotting rebellion. The real message was crystal clear. Morcant was systematically eliminating northern houses whether they cooperated or not. The trip to the capital was never about negotiation. It was about getting Caedric away from his power base while Morcant dismantled his alliances. "That son of a bitch," Caedric said quietly. Thorn's expression was grim. "If we stay for the meeting tomorrow, he arrests me on similar charges, and by the time news reaches the north, half my allies are already destroyed." Caedric stood, mind racing through collapsing options. "We leave. Now. Forget the audience. Forget political courtesy. We ride north immediately and prepare for war because it has already started. The palace guards will not let us leave quietly." "Then we do not leave quietly." They move fast, rousing sleeping soldiers, preparing horses, abandoning everything non-essential. Within 30 minutes, Caedric's entire company stood ready in the courtyard, armed and mounted, waiting for orders that would likely start a civil war. Caedric swung into his saddle, checking his sword one final time. "We ride hard for the northern gate. Anyone who tries to stop us dies. No prisoners, no mercy. Clear?" 50 voices answered in unison. "Clear, Your Grace." They exploded into the street like cavalry hitting enemy lines. The palace guards responded within seconds, bells ringing alarm across the capital as soldiers scrambled to intercept. Caedric led the charge, sword drawn, cutting through the first line of defense before they could properly form ranks. Steel rang against steel in narrow streets while citizens screamed and scattered. Behind him, his men fought with the disciplined brutality of soldiers who understood retreat was not an option. They carved through resistance like a blade through flesh, leaving bodies in their wake, pushing toward the northern gate through sheer momentum and violence. Crossbow bolts hissed past Kaedric's head. A guard lunged from an alley. Kaedric killed him without slowing, blade opening throat, already moving to the next threat. This was what he trained for, what he built himself into. A weapon aimed at anything threatening survival. The northern gate appeared ahead, massive and closed, guards scrambling to reinforce it before Kaedric's company arrived. "Thorn!" Kaedric shouted. "Barricade!" The captain understood immediately. 5 men broke from formation, charging the gate with axes, striking the wooden reinforcement bars, while the rest held position against pursuing guards. Wood splintered under repeated impacts. The bar broke. Gates swung open. They poured through into darkness beyond the city walls, horses stretching into full gallop, leaving chaos and alarm bells fading behind them. 2 miles out, Kaedric finally slowed, checking his company. 3 men wounded, none seriously. 5 horses lathered and struggling, but everyone alive and functional. "We do not stop until dawn," Kaedric ordered. "Morkant will send riders after us. I want distance before they organize pursuit." They rode through the night, pushing horses to the edge of collapse, eating miles between them and the capital like their lives depended on it, because their lives did depend on it. By dawn, they reached the forest border where northern territories began. Kaedric called a brief halt, letting horses rest and men drink from a frozen stream. Captain Thorn approached, blood on his armor from the fighting, his expression carrying questions about what came next. "That was treason," Thorn said simply. "That was survival." Kaedric dismounted, checking his horse for injuries. Morkant showed his hand. He was never going to negotiate. He was going to arrest me, dismantle the northern houses, and seize our territories while eliminating anyone strong enough to resist. So now what? Kaedric looked north toward Thornvale, toward Isolde waiting for news, toward lands he spent 14 years protecting through brutal efficiency and absolute control. "Now we go to war," he said quietly. "Real war. The kind that ends with either Morkant dead or the North burned to ash. No middle ground. No political maneuvering, just violence until one side cannot continue." Thorn nodded slowly. "The men are ready, Your Grace." "Good. Because Morkant will come with everything he has, and when he does, we make him regret every decision that brought him north." They remounted and continued riding, the sun rising behind them, illuminating a kingdom about to tear itself apart because 2 men refused to yield, and power never divided peacefully. Chets. Isolde stood on Thornville's battlements when the lookout spotted riders approaching from the south. 5 days. Kaedric had been gone 5 days and was not supposed to return for at least another week. The fact that he was coming back early meant something had gone catastrophically wrong. She descended to the courtyard, arriving just as the gates opened, and Kaedric's company thundered through. They looked like soldiers returning from battle, exhausted, blood-spattered, pushed to the edge of collapse. Kaedric dismounted, moving toward her with the kind of focused intensity that meant his mind was already 3 moves ahead, planning for disasters not yet visible. "What happened?" Isolde demanded. "Morkant declared war while pretending to negotiate peace." Kaedric gestured for her to follow him inside. "We need to mobilize immediately. Full military preparation. He will move against us within days." They entered the castle, climbing stairs to the war room while Kaedric explained everything. The trap, Harwick's arrest, the fighting retreat through the capital. His voice remained controlled, clinical, but Isolde heard the rage underneath, tightly leashed but ready to explode. In the war room, maps still covered the table from the meeting with northern lords. Kaedric began marking new positions, updating intelligence, working through logistics with mechanical efficiency. Isolde watched him for a moment, seeing the transformation. This was the Iron Duke in full. Cold, calculating, completely focused on survival through superior violence. The man who kissed her in the courtyard was locked away somewhere beneath armor that would not come off until the war ended. "Kaedric," she said quietly. He did not look up. "I need to send ravens to every allied house, coordinate defensive positions, establish supply lines. There is no time for—" "Kaedric," firmer this time. He stopped, finally meeting her eyes. Isolde crossed to him, taking both his hands in hers despite the blood still staining his gloves. You came back. I told you I would. You fought your way out of the capital, rode for 5 days straight, and came back. She squeezed his hands. That matters. Something cracked in Kadrick's expression, just for a moment, just long enough for her to see the exhaustion and fear and overwhelming responsibility threatening to crush him. Then the walls rebuilt, and he pulled his hands away gently. I need to work. I know. But first you need to understand something. Isolde moved closer, invading space he tried to maintain. You are not alone in this. You have allies. You have soldiers who will follow you into hell, and you have me. So stop trying to carry everything yourself before it breaks you. I am not. Yes, you are. She cut him off. You are standing here planning a war and trying to calculate how to protect everyone, while simultaneously pushing away anyone who might help, because accepting help means admitting vulnerability. Stop it. Kadrick stared at her, caught between the need to maintain control and the desperate desire to let someone else carry even a fraction of the weight. I do not know how, he admitted finally, voice barely above a whisper. Then learn. Isolde reached up, cupping his face with both hands. Because this war is coming whether you are ready or not. And you will need people you trust or Morkant will destroy you through isolation before his armies ever arrive. For a long moment they stood in silence while outside Thornvale prepared for siege and soldiers sharpened weapons and the kingdom held its breath waiting for violence to erupt. Then Kadrick nodded once, slowly, accepting what he spent 14 years refusing. He needed help, and needing help did not make him weak. It made him human, but being human also meant being vulnerable, and vulnerable meant Morkant could hurt him in ways that had nothing to do with swords or battles. The war was coming, and when it arrived, Kadrick would discover that the greatest threat was not the armies marching north. It was what those armies could take away from him if he failed to stop them. The northern houses answered Kadrick's call within 48 hours. Lords arrived at Thornvale with their personal guards and military assessments, filling the great hall with the organized chaos of men preparing for war. Maps covered every surface. Scouts delivered intelligence hourly. Blacksmiths worked around the clock forging weapons while quartermasters calculated food stores and supply chains that would determine whether armies starved before they ever reached battle. Kadrick moved through it all like a man conducting an orchestra of violence, directing resources and soldiers with the cold efficiency that made him legendary. But beneath the strategic planning and tactical calculations, something else moved through his mind like poison in water. Morkant had known exactly when to strike Harwick, had known Kadrick would be in the capital, had positioned everything perfectly to split northern forces while eliminating their strongest leader. Someone was feeding him information from inside Thornvale. Isolde noticed the shift in Kadrick's demeanor during the third day of war preparations. He grew quieter, more watchful, his gray eyes tracking people with the kind of predatory focus that suggested he was hunting something invisible. She found him alone in the war room after midnight, standing motionless before the maps, one hand resting on his sword hilt. You have not slept in 3 days, Isolde said from the doorway. Kadrick did not turn. Sleep is a luxury I cannot afford. You are going to collapse if you continue like this. Then I collapse after Morkant is dealt with. He finally looked at her, and the exhaustion in his eyes went deeper than physical fatigue. How well do you know the northern lords? The question landed with strange weight. Isolde moved into the room, closing the door behind her. I have met most of them during council meetings. Why? Because Morkant knew things he should not have known. Timing, locations, strategic details discussed only in this room with people I thought I could trust. Kadrick's voice remained flat, but tension coiled beneath every word. Someone is selling information, and I need to know who before they get everyone killed. You think one of your allies is a traitor. I think people do terrible things when sufficiently motivated. Fear, gold, promises of power. Morkant has all three in abundance. Isolde studied him, seeing the way suspicion was eating him alive from the inside. This was what isolation bred. The inability to trust anyone fully because trust required vulnerability, and vulnerability killed. "What are you going to do?" she asked carefully. "Whatever is necessary." Kadric turned back to the maps. "I will feed different information to different lords. Watch what intelligence reaches Morkant. Track the source. Then eliminate it. And if you are wrong, if paranoia makes you suspect innocent people," his jaw tightened, "then I would rather be wrong and paranoid than trusting and dead." The next morning, Kaedric implemented his trap with surgical precision. He called separate private meetings with 3 northern lords, Brennan, Corwin, and Matthias. Each meeting covered the same basic strategy, but with one critical difference. Kaedric told Brennan that the main northern army would gather at Ravenmoor. He told Corwin they would gather at Ashwood. He told Matthias they would gather at the Frozen Marches. Then he waited to see which location Morkant's forces moved toward. The answer came 4 days later. Scouts reported that Morkant's advance companies were marching north toward Ashwood, positioning themselves to intercept an army gathering there. They moved with the confidence of men who knew exactly where their enemy would be. Kaedric stood in the war room staring at the intelligence report, feeling something cold and vicious settle into his chest. Lord Corwin, a man he had known for 6 years, a man who fought beside him during border conflicts. A man he trusted enough to include in his inner circle. Sold him out for whatever Morkant offered. Captain Thorne entered without knocking, reading Kaedric's expression immediately. "You found the leak." "Corwin." Kaedric's voice carried no emotion, just flat certainty. "He was the only person who knew about Ashwood. What do you want to do?" "Bring him to me." Quietly. No witnesses. Thorne hesitated for the first time Kaedric could remember. "Your Grace, if you are wrong." "I am not wrong." Kaedric met his captain's eyes. "And even if I was, the message needs to be clear. Betrayal has consequences." 20 minutes later, 4 guards escorted Lord Corwin into the war room and closed the doors behind them. Corwin was 50, thick through the shoulders, with the kind of face that smiled easily and lied better. He looked genuinely confused as he approached Kaedric. "Your Grace, what is this about? Your men said it was urgent but would not explain." "When did Morkant approach you?" Kaedric interrupted. The confusion on Corwin's face deepened. "I do not understand." "Stop lying." Kaedric's voice dropped to something dangerous. "I fed you false information about troop positions. That information reached Morkant. You are the only person who knew those specific details. So I will ask again. When did he approach you?" Color drained from Corwin's face. For a moment he maintained the pretense of innocence. Then something shifted in his expression, and the mask fell away entirely. 3 months ago, Corwin said quietly, "before you even knew the king was dead." The admission landed like a physical blow. Kaedric felt rage building behind his ribs, hot and vicious, demanding immediate violence. He forced it down through sheer will, needing answers before he gave in to the desire to kill this man with his bare hands. "Why?" One word, flat, cold. Corwin's laugh was bitter, exhausted. "Because Morkant promised to protect my family when he comes north. Because he has my daughter held in the capital as insurance. Because he made it very clear that if I did not cooperate, everyone I love would die screaming." The older man's voice cracked. "You think you are the only one with vulnerabilities, Kaedric? You think the rest of us do not have people we would betray kingdoms to protect?" The logic was sound, horrible and devastating and completely understandable, which made it worse. "You could have told me," Kaedric said. "We could have found a way to extract your daughter, mounted a rescue, negotiated." "No, you would have done exactly what you are doing right now. You would have seen me as a liability and eliminated the problem before it could threaten your precious control." Corwin straightened, accepting his fate with the dignity of a man who knew execution was inevitable. "You do not negotiate, Kaedric. You do not compromise. You do not trust. You just destroy anything that might hurt you before it gets the chance." The words cut deeper than any blade, because they were true. Kaedric stared at the man who betrayed him, seeing the fear and desperation and exhausted resignation in his eyes. Corwin was not a villain. He was a father trying to save his daughter using the only leverage available, And Caedric was about to kill him for it because that was what rulers did when betrayal threatened everything they built. "Captain Thorn," Caedric said quietly, "Your Grace. Take Lord Corwin to the cells. I will deal with him after the war." Shock rippled through the room. Corwin stared at Caedric like he had grown a second head. "You are not going to execute me?" "Not yet." Caedric turned away, unable to look at the man any longer. "But after we defeat Morkant, we are going to have a very long conversation about consequences and whether saving your daughter justifies the hundreds of people who will die because you fed our enemy intelligence." Guards escorted Corwin out, leaving Caedric alone with Thorn and the suffocating weight of decisions that had no good answers. "You are getting soft," Thorn observed. "I'm getting practical. Executing him now makes me the monster Morkant claims I am. Sparing him shows the other lords that I understand desperation and coercion." Caedric moved to the window, watching snow fall across the courtyard. "And it buys us time to figure out how to rescue his daughter without compromising our strategy." "You are planning a rescue mission in the middle of a war." "I am planning to prove that loyalty is rewarded even when circumstances force betrayal." Caedric's reflection stared back at him from the glass, looking older and more exhausted than he felt. Corwin was right about one thing. I do not trust easily. But maybe that is what Morkant wants. Maybe destroying trust between allies is more valuable than any military victory. Thorn said nothing for a long moment. Then quietly, "Isolde is changing you. Isolde is reminding me what it means to be human instead of just a weapon. And if being human gets you killed?" Caedric smiled without humor. "Then at least I die as myself instead of the monster everyone expects." The captain left, and Caedric remained standing at the window, watching his fortress prepare for a war that would determine whether the North survived or burned. Behind him, the door opened again. He knew without turning that it was Isolde. She moved differently than anyone else. Quieter, more deliberate, like she was constantly aware of occupying space meant for someone else. "I heard what happened with Corwin," she said. "Then you know I found the traitor. I know you chose mercy over vengeance. That matters." Caedric turned to face her. "It was not mercy. It was strategy. It was both." Isolde crossed to him, taking his hand. "And the fact that you can recognize the difference means you are not as lost as you think you are." He pulled her closer, needing the contact more than he wanted to admit. "What if I am wrong? What if sparing him makes me look weak and encourages more betrayal? Then you deal with that when it happens. But right now, you showed your remaining allies that you understand the difference between coerced cooperation and genuine treachery. That is leadership, Caedric. Not the brutal kind you are used to, but the kind that makes people want to follow you instead of just fearing what happens if they do not." Caedric rested his forehead against hers, breathing in the scent of her hair, letting himself have one moment of vulnerability before the war consumed everything. "I'm terrified I'm going to fail," he admitted. "That all of this, the planning, the alliances, the brutal efficiency, is going to collapse, and everyone depending on me will die because I was not ruthless enough. Or maybe they survive because you were human enough to understand that fear and desperation drive people to terrible choices." Isolde pulled back slightly, meeting his eyes. "You cannot control everything, Caedric, and trying to is what makes you vulnerable. Let people help. Trust your allies, except that sometimes you need to be flexible instead of just iron. Flexibility breaks under pressure. So does iron if you hit it hard enough in the right place." Before Caedric could respond, rapid footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. The door burst open and one of the scouts stumbled in, breathing hard, his face carrying the kind of panic that preceded catastrophic news. "Your Grace," the scout gasped, "Morkant's army is not marching toward Ashwood." Caedric went rigid. "What?" "They are here, outside Thornvale. 15,000 men. They surrounded the castle while we were watching the western approach." The world tilted. Caedric moved to the window and looked down at the valley surrounding Thornvale. Torches burned like stars across the landscape. Thousands of them. An army that appeared overnight because everyone was looking the wrong direction, because Morkant fed Corwin false information about false information. The trap within the trap. "How long until they attack?" Caedric's voice remained steady through sheer force of will. "Dawn. Maybe sooner. Kedrick's mind raced through collapsing options. Thornvale's garrison numbered 800 against 15,000. The castle could withstand a siege, but only if supply lines remained open. Morkant just cut off every approach. The northern reinforcements were scattered, positioning themselves based on intelligence that was deliberately wrong. They were completely isolated. Captain Thorne appeared in the doorway, armor already on, sword drawn. "Your Grace, we need to evacuate you now. There is a tunnel system that leads to—" "No." Kedrick's voice cut through the rising panic like a blade. "I am not abandoning my people." "Your Grace, if you die here—" "If I run, the North falls apart. Every house that allied with me becomes vulnerable. Morkant wins without fighting." Kedrick turned from the window, making the decision that would define everything that followed. "We hold. We make him bleed for every foot of ground. We show him that taking Thornvale requires a price he cannot afford to pay." Thorne stared at him. "We cannot win this fight." "No, but we can survive it long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Lord Brennan knows where we are. So does Matthias. When they realize Morkant moved against Thornvale, they will come." Kedrick moved toward the door, already shifting into combat mode. "Assemble the garrison, full defensive positions, archers on the walls, oil ready at the gates. We turn this castle into a slaughterhouse." Orders spread through Thornvale like wildfire. Soldiers rushed to positions, civilians evacuated to the lower levels. Blacksmiths distributed weapons. The castle that stood for 6 generations prepared to prove why it survived when others fell. Kedrick climbed to the battlements, looking out at the army surrounding his home. 15,000 men. Siege engines. Supplies for a prolonged assault. Morkant had planned this perfectly, using Kedrick's own paranoia about traitors to distract him from the real threat. Isolde appeared beside him, dressed in leather armor someone found that almost fit, a sword at her hip despite probably never using one in combat. "You should be in the lower levels with the civilians," Kedrick said. "I should be wherever you are." "Isolde, no." Her voice was steel. "You do not get to protect me by pushing me away. If this castle falls, we fall together. If it stands, we stand together. That is not negotiable." Kedrick looked at her, this woman who walked into his fortress 6 weeks ago and systematically destroyed every defense he spent 14 years building. She was not supposed to matter this much, was not supposed to become the one thing he could not afford to lose. But she did. And losing her would break something inside him that no amount of discipline could repair. "Stay close to me during the assault," he said finally. "And if I tell you to run, you run. Understand? Only if you promise to run with me." "Isolde, promise me, Kedrick, because I know you. I know you will sacrifice yourself to buy time for everyone else. So promise me that you value your own life enough to survive this." Kedrick pulled her close, kissing her hard and desperate, tasting fear and determination and the horrible awareness that this might be the last quiet moment they ever had. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I promise." A horn blast echoed across the valley. Morkant's army was moving. Kedrick drew his sword, the blade catching torchlight, and stepped to the edge of the battlement where his soldiers could see him. 800 men looked up at their duke, waiting for orders that would determine whether they lived or died. "Thornvale has stood for 6 generations, Kedrick called out, his voice carrying across stone and tension. "It stood because our ancestors refused to bend, refused to break, refused to let anyone take what we built. Tonight, Morkant brings 15,000 men thinking numbers alone will crush us. He is wrong." Silence held the castle. "We are outnumbered. We are isolated. We are facing odds that should terrify us. But we are also standing on walls built by people who understood that some things are worth dying for. This castle, this land, the people depending on us to hold the line." Kedrick raised his sword. "So we hold, we fight, and we show that bastard regent that taking Thornvale requires paying a price in blood that bankrupts kingdoms." 800 voices roared approval. The assault began with siege engines launching burning projectiles into the sky. Kedrick watched them arc overhead like falling stars, then gave the order that started the bloodiest night Thornvale had ever witnessed. "Archers, loose!" Arrows filled the air, raining down on Morkant's advancing soldiers. Men screamed, shields splintered, but the army kept coming, disciplined and relentless, pressing toward the walls like a tide that could not be stopped. Ladders slammed against stone. Soldiers climbed. Defenders met them at the top, swords flashing in firelight, bodies tumbling from heights that killed before they hit ground. Kadrik fought at the front, his blade opening throats and severing limbs, moving with the brutal efficiency of someone who learned violence as a survival skill. Beside him, Captain Thorne commanded the defense, while Isolde stayed close, surprising everyone including herself by using the sword with enough competence to stay alive. The battle raged through the night. Wave after wave crashed against Thornvale's walls. Defenders died. Attackers died. Blood made stone slippery. Exhaustion pulled at muscles until lifting weapons required pure willpower over physical capability. At some point during the chaos, Caedric lost track of Isolde. One moment she was beside him. The next, the battle surged and bodies filled the space between them. Panic seized his chest harder than any physical pain. He searched desperately through the fighting, trying to spot her among the mass of soldiers. Then he saw her, 20 feet away, surrounded by 3 of Morkant's men, fighting for her life with a skill that came from desperation rather than training. Caedric moved without thinking. He cut through the distance like a blade through flesh, killing the first attacker with a strike that nearly severed his head. The second died before he realized the threat. The third managed to raise his sword before Caedric drove his blade through the man's chest. Isolde stumbled back, breathing hard, blood on her face from a cut above her eye. "Are you hurt?" Caedric demanded. "No. Are you? We need to—" An explosion cut off his words. The main gate buckled inward, blasted apart by some kind of alchemical charge. Soldiers poured through the breach like water through a broken dam, overwhelming defenders through sheer numbers. The castle was falling. Caedric grabbed Isolde's hand, pulling her toward the interior. "Fall back! Everyone to the keep!" Soldiers retreated in organized chaos, fighting rearguard actions while civilians fled deeper into Thornvale's stone heart. The strategy shifted from holding walls to surviving long enough for rescue that might never come. They barricaded themselves in the keep as dawn broke gray and cold over the battlefield. Caedric stood in what remained of his war room, surrounded by exhausted soldiers and the reality of imminent defeat. Morkant's forces controlled the outer castle. The keep would not hold against sustained assault. Hours remained at most before they were overrun. He had failed. Captain Thorne appeared in the doorway, supporting a wounded soldier. "Your Grace, there is someone here demanding to speak with you under flag of truce. Tell them I do not negotiate with—" "It is not Morkant." Thorne's expression was grim. "It is Lord Brennan." Confusion and hope collided in Caedric's chest. He descended to the courtyard where Brennan waited, still in armor, exhaustion etched into his weathered face. The old lord looked at Caedric with something that might have been pity. "You need to surrender," Brennan said without preamble. The words hit like a physical blow. "What?" "Morkant has your northern allies surrounded. All of them. He knew exactly where everyone positioned their forces because Corwin was not the only traitor." Brennan's voice carried the weight of a man delivering his own death sentence. "I'm sorry, Caedric, but he got to most of us. Promises, threats, blackmail, whatever worked. The Northern Alliance is broken." Caedric felt the ground disappear beneath him. Not just Corwin. Multiple lords. Maybe all of them. The rebellion he spent weeks organizing was riddled with people selling information to save themselves or their families. He had lost before the war even started. "Why are you telling me this?" Caedric asked quietly. "Because Morkant sent me with an offer. Surrender now. Accept exile. He will allow Thornvale to remain standing and your people to live. If you refuse, he burns this castle to foundations with everyone still inside." Brennan met his eyes. "I am sorry, Caedric, but there is no winning this. The only choice left is how many people die before you accept reality." Silence fell across the courtyard. Every soldier, every noble, every person who followed Caedric into this disaster waited to hear what the Iron Duke would do when iron finally shattered. Caedric looked at Isolde standing beside him, blood and exhaustion on her face, still here despite every reason to run. He looked at Captain Thorne, loyal to the end, waiting for orders that might get everyone killed. He looked at Thornvale's walls, built by 6 generations of his family, about to fall because he could not see the betrayal coming from inside his own alliance. And he understood with devastating clarity that everything he built, the control, the discipline, the ruthless efficiency, meant nothing if he could not protect the people depending on him. Power was not what you could force. Power was what you could preserve when everything collapsed. "Tell Morcant I accept his terms," Cadric said quietly. "On one condition. He releases every civilian in Thornvale unharmed and allows my soldiers to leave with their weapons. I surrender myself alone." "Cadric, no!" Isolde grabbed his arm. "Those are my terms," he said, not looking at her because looking at her would break his resolve. "I am done sacrificing people for pride." Brennan nodded slowly. "I will deliver your answer." After the old lord left, chaos erupted. Soldiers protested. Thorn argued. Isolde tried physically dragging Cadric away from the decision, but Cadric had already made the only choice that mattered. The Iron Duke was surrendering because being human meant valuing lives over victories, and that revelation, that fundamental transformation from weapon to person, was somehow both his greatest failure and his only redemption. The surrender negotiations took place in Thornvale's Great Hall, with Morcant sitting in Cadric's chair like he already owned the castle. The regent was 50, lean and predatory, with the kind of face that suggested intelligence weaponized into cruelty. He wore expensive clothes tailored to emphasize power without the burden of actually carrying weapons. Men like Morcant did not fight their own battles. They positioned others to die in their place while collecting victories built on corpses they never saw. Cadric stood before him, disarmed, exhausted, defeat carved into his posture but not yet his eyes. Behind Morcant, 50 soldiers lined the walls. Outside, 15,000 more controlled every approach. The Iron Duke had nothing left except the terms of his own destruction. Morcant smiled like a man savoring expensive wine. "The great Duke Thornvale, reduced to begging for mercy. I confess, this moment exceeds my expectations." "I am not begging." Cadric's voice remained flat, drained of everything except the baseline requirement to speak. "I am negotiating surrender terms that preserve civilian lives." "You surrendered the moment you failed to see betrayal coming from every direction." Morcant leaned forward. "Corwin was just the beginning. I spent months cultivating sources inside your alliance, lords who resented your control, captains who wanted advancement you would never give them, even servants who preferred gold over loyalty to a master who barely acknowledged their existence." The words landed like physical blows because they were true. Cadric built an empire on fear and isolation, and when he needed people to stand with him, he discovered he had spent 14 years ensuring no one truly would. Loyalty purchased through intimidation evaporated the moment someone offered better terms. Trust built on nothing but dominance collapsed when tested. He had become exactly what Isolde warned him about, brittle iron waiting for the right hit to shatter completely. "My terms remain unchanged," Cadric said. "Release everyone. I surrender myself alone." "Oh, you will surrender yourself, but I think I will keep Lady Isolde as well." Morcant's smile widened. "Insurance against northern houses attempting any foolish rescue operations. Plus, I understand she has become quite important to you. Leverage through attachment is so much more effective than leverage through fear." Every muscle in Cadric's body went rigid. Isolde stood 10 feet behind him, flanked by guards, her face pale but composed. She met his eyes and shook her head slightly, a silent message that said, "Do not sacrifice anything more for me." But sacrifice was all Cadric had left. "She is irrelevant to our conflict," Cadric said carefully. "Holding her serves no strategic purpose." "She serves the strategic purpose of ensuring your complete cooperation," Morcant gestured lazily. "Here are my actual terms, Thornvale. You and Lady Isolde will be escorted to the capital. Your soldiers will surrender their weapons and disperse. Thornvale Castle will remain standing as a gesture of mercy, but governance transfers to a regent of my choosing. You will publicly confess to sedition, legitimizing my actions before the kingdom. Then you will both live out your remaining years in comfortable imprisonment." Comfortable imprisonment is still imprisonment, yes, but it is imprisonment instead of execution, which demonstrates my generosity and willingness to spare even those who opposed me. Morcant stood, moving closer. You should accept gratefully, Kedrick. These terms are far better than you deserve after forcing me to march 15,000 men north through winter storms. Kedrick stared at the man who orchestrated his downfall through patience and manipulation instead of open warfare. Morkant was everything Kedrick was not. Political, subtle, willing to spend years positioning pieces before making moves that appeared effortless when they finally came. And he won, because Kedrick never learned that power through fear, only lasted until someone stopped being afraid. I accept your terms, Kedrick said quietly. Isolde made a sound like something breaking. Morkant's smile became genuine. Excellent. We depart for the capital at dawn. I suggest you spend tonight preparing for a very different life than the one you are accustomed to. Guards escorted Kedrick from the hall, back to the keep that would serve as his prison until morning. Isolde walked beside him, silent, her hand finding his and squeezing hard enough to hurt. They climbed stairs to what remained of Kedrick's private chambers. Soldiers stationed themselves outside, while Kedrick and Isolde stood in the room where this disaster began, surrounded by maps and battle plans that meant nothing now. Isolde spoke first, voice shaking with barely controlled fury. You should have fought. I did fight. I lost. Then you should have died fighting instead of surrendering everything you built. Kedrick turned to face her, seeing the anger and fear and desperate frustration in her eyes. Everything I built was wrong. I ruled through fear and isolation and the absolute certainty that control mattered more than connection. And when I needed people to stand with me, I discovered I had spent 14 years ensuring no one would. That is not true. It is completely true. Kedrick moved closer, taking both her hands. You warned me. You told me brittle iron shatters when hit hard enough. I did not listen because listening required admitting vulnerability. Now everyone pays for that failure. Isolde's expression cracked. Tears spilled down her face despite obvious efforts to contain them. I am not afraid of imprisonment. I am afraid of what they will do to you once we are separated and no one is watching. Then we make sure they never separate us. How? Morkant controls everything. Your allies betrayed you. Your army surrendered. There is no cavalry coming to rescue us. Kedrick pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head, feeling her heart beat against his chest. For 14 years, he avoided this exact situation, caring about someone enough that losing them would destroy him. Now he stood in the wreckage of that fear made manifest, holding the one person who somehow made the destruction worthwhile. I need you to do something for me, he said quietly. Isolde pulled back, looking up at him. What? I need you to trust me one more time. Kedrick, please. The word came out rougher than intended. I spent 14 years refusing to trust anyone. Now I am asking you to trust me when I have given you every reason not to. Isolde searched his face, looking for whatever plan was forming behind exhausted gray eyes. Then slowly, reluctantly, she nodded. Always, she whispered. Kedrick kissed her, gentle this time, memorizing the taste and feel because there was a very real possibility this would be the last quiet moment they ever shared. When they broke apart, he held her face between both hands. Whatever happens tomorrow, remember that you changed me. You took something brutal and isolated, and you made it human again. That matters more than any kingdom. You are terrifying me. Good. Fear keeps you alert. They spent the night holding each other while outside Morkant's army celebrated victory, and Thornvale's soldiers mourned the loss of everything they knew. Dawn arrived cold and merciless. Guards came for Kedrick and Isolde shortly after sunrise, escorting them down to the courtyard, where Morkant waited beside an ornate carriage designed for transporting prisoners in style. The regent looked pleased, standing amid the ruins of Kedrick's power, savoring the moment before departure. Captain Thorn stood nearby, disarmed but present, his weathered face carrying the grief of a man watching his duke led to slaughter. Around them, Thornvale's remaining soldiers formed silent ranks, bearing witness to the end of everything they served. Kedrick walked toward the carriage with Isolde at his side, refusing to lower his eyes or show weakness even now. He had surrendered, but he would not grovel. Some part of him remained the Iron Duke, despite the iron shattering. And then, just as they reached the carriage, everything changed. A horn blast echoed from the northern valley. Then another and another. Morkant's expression shifted from satisfaction to confusion to dawning concern. He turned toward the sound, barking orders at his commanders. Soldiers scrambled to defensive positions while scouts ran for the walls. Kedrick felt something dangerous kindle in his chest, something that felt like hope, despite knowing better. One of Morkant's officers rushed across the courtyard, breathing hard. "Your Grace, there are armies approaching from 3 directions, thousands of men, northern banners. They are surrounding our position." The regent's face went white. "That is impossible. Intelligence confirmed all northern forces were scattered and leaderless." Intelligence was wrong. Kedrick started laughing. It started as a low sound, almost inaudible, then built into something harsh and wild that carried 14 years of pressure, finally releasing. Morkant spun toward him, fury replacing shock. "What did you do?" the regent demanded. "I trusted someone." Kedrick met his eyes, and the Iron Duke was suddenly visible again beneath the exhaustion and defeat. "You spent months cultivating traitors inside my alliance. You positioned every piece perfectly. You won because you understood that I was isolated and brittle and could not see betrayal coming." "Then how?" "Because 3 days before you surrounded Thornvale, I sent Captain Thorne south with orders to find someone I could still trust." Kedrick glanced at Isolde, seeing understanding dawn on her face. "Her father, Lord Carvain, a man whose daughter I swore to protect, giving him motivation to help that had nothing to do with fear or coercion." Morkant's expression shattered into something ugly. "You manipulated? I learned. You taught me that power through fear collapses when someone offers better terms. So I offered Lord Carvain something you never could. Genuine alliance built on mutual interest instead of intimidation." Kedrick took a step forward, hands still bound but posture shifting into something predatory. "He rallied southern houses who resented your power grab, combined forces with the northern lords you thought you controlled, and spent the last 72 hours marching here while you wasted time negotiating surrender terms for a man who was never actually defeated." The courtyard exploded into chaos. Northern soldiers who surrendered their weapons suddenly were not as disarmed as Morkant assumed. Blades appeared from hidden locations. Soldiers wearing Morkant's colors revealed northern allegiances. The castle garrison that looked beaten and broken transformed into a fighting force that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Kedrick moved fast, slamming his bound wrists into the nearest guard's face, taking the man's sword before he hit ground. He cut his bonds, then Isolde's, pulling her behind him as violence erupted across Thornvale's courtyard. Morkant's 15,000 men found themselves trapped inside a fortress, surrounded by northern armies outside and betrayal inside. The perfect siege reversed. The hunter became the hunted. Captain Thorne appeared through the chaos, tossing Kedrick his actual sword. "Thought you might want this back, Your Grace." "Good timing, Captain. You should have told me the plan earlier. I spent 3 days thinking I was abandoning you." "You were supposed to think that? Everyone was, including Morkant's spies." Kedrick turned, searching through the fighting. "Where is he?" "Moving toward the northern tower, probably trying to reach the escape tunnels." Kedrick grabbed Isolde's hand. "Stay with Thorne. Do not follow me." "Like hell I am staying, Isolde." He cupped her face with his free hand, fierce and desperate. "I need you safe. I need to know that if this goes wrong, you survive. Please." She stared at him for a heartbeat, then nodded reluctantly. "Do not die, Kedrick. We have a very long conversation scheduled about you not telling me this plan." He kissed her hard and fast, then turned and ran toward the northern tower. The battle raged around him. Steel rang against steel. Men screamed. Blood made stone slippery. But Kedrick moved through it with the focused intensity of someone who had one objective and would accept nothing less than completion. He caught Morkant at the tower entrance with 6 guards forming a defensive perimeter. The regent saw him coming and his face twisted into something between fury and fear. "Kill him!" Morkant shouted. The guards moved to intercept. Kedrick met them with violence that came from 14 years of discipline and 3 days of suppressed rage at being outmaneuvered. He killed the first 2 before they properly raised weapons. The third managed to block 1 strike before Kedrick's blade found his throat. The 4th and 5th attacked together, coordinated, professional. It did not matter. Kadric was faster, stronger, and absolutely unwilling to let anything stop him from reaching the man who tried to destroy everything he built. He cut through both guards with strikes that felt less like combat and more like execution. The sixth guard ran. Morkant backed against the tower door, drawing an ornamental dagger that probably never saw real combat. "You cannot win this. Even if you kill me, Parliament will send someone else. The Crown will never stop trying to control the North." "Then we will fight them all." Kadric advanced slowly, sword ready. "One at a time, forever if necessary, because you taught me something valuable during this disaster." "What?" "That I would rather die fighting for people I care about than survive by controlling people through fear." Kadric stopped 3 feet away. "You tried to destroy me by exploiting my isolation. Instead, you showed me that the thing I feared most, connection, vulnerability, needing people, was actually what made me stronger than you could ever be." Morkant lunged desperately, blade aimed at Kadric's chest. Kadric sidestepped, caught the regent's wrist, and twisted hard enough to snap bone. The ornamental dagger clattered across stone. Morkant collapsed, cradling his broken wrist, all pretense of control evaporating into raw fear. "Please," the regent gasped, "I can offer you anything: gold, territory, a seat on the Crown Council." "I do not want anything you can offer." "Then what do you want?" Kadric looked down at the man who nearly destroyed him through patience and manipulation and understanding that isolated power was brittle power. He thought about execution, about the satisfaction of killing someone who caused so much suffering, about the message it would send to anyone else considering similar moves. Then he thought about Isolde standing in the snow telling him that real strength was being human enough to understand fear and desperation. And he made a choice that surprised even himself. "I want you to leave the North and never return." Kadric lowered his sword. "I want you to tell Parliament and the Crown Council that the Northern Territories are independent. Not through rebellion, but through mutual agreement that we function better governing ourselves. And I want you to spend the rest of your life remembering that you lost, because you thought power was something you took, instead of something people gave willingly." Morkant stared at him like he was insane. "You are letting me live?" "I am choosing mercy over vengeance because someone taught me the difference." Kadric turned away, heading back toward the courtyard. "But if you ever threaten the North again, I will kill you slowly enough that you beg for the mercy I am showing now." He left Morkant broken and shocked in the tower entrance, then returned to find Isolde. The battle was ending. Morkant's army, trapped and surrounded, surrendered in sections as northern forces pressed from all sides. The siege that was supposed to crush Thornvale instead became a slaughter that proved why you never underestimated people with nothing left to lose. Kadric found Isolde in the Great Hall, coordinating with Lord Carvain, who arrived through the northern gate with 5,000 southern soldiers. Her father was older, distinguished, and currently staring at his daughter with obvious pride mixed with concern. Isolde saw Kadric and ran to him, throwing herself into his arms hard enough to make him stagger. "You terrifying, manipulative, brilliant bastard. You planned this entire thing." "I planned the framework. Your father executed it perfectly." Kadric looked at Carvain over Isolde's shoulder. "Thank you." The older man nodded slowly. "You protected my daughter and offered genuine alliance instead of coercion. That bought loyalty your brutality never could." He paused. "Also, Morkant tried to assassinate me 6 months ago. This was partially revenge." "I will accept revenge-motivated alliances." Isolde pulled back, looking up at Kadric with eyes that held too many emotions to name. "When did you plan this?" "The night we stood on the battlements, and you told me that iron breaks when hit hard enough. You were right, so I decided to be something other than iron." Kadric touched her face gently. "I decided to be someone who trusts people, who builds alliances through connection instead of fear, who accepts that vulnerability is not weakness, it is the foundation of everything worth protecting." "You changed. You changed me." Around them, Thornvale's defenders began celebrating victory while medics treated wounded and soldiers secured prisoners. The castle that nearly fell now stood stronger than before, because the man defending it finally learned that true power came not from isolation, but from the willingness to need people and let them need you in return. Captain Thorne approached, blood on his armor, but alive. Your Grace, Lord Brennan is requesting audience, along with the other northern lords. Send them to the war room. We have a kingdom to restructure. As Thorne left, Isolde squeezed Cadric's hand. What happens now? Cadric looked around the great hall, seeing his people, soldiers and nobles and civilians who survived because he finally prioritized their lives over his pride. He thought about Morcant fleeing north with a broken wrist and shattered plans. He thought about Parliament receiving news that the North just won independence through military victory and political maneuvering. And he thought about the woman standing beside him who walked into his fortress and systematically destroyed every defense he built until nothing remained except the person he was always supposed to be. Now we figure out how to rule without fear, Cadric said. How to build alliances that last. How to protect people through connection instead of intimidation. He pulled Isolde closer. And we do it together because I am done pretending I can survive alone. She smiled, fierce and genuine. Together. Always. They walked toward the war room where northern lords waited to negotiate the future of territories that just proved they would rather burn kingdoms than surrender autonomy. Behind them, dawn light spilled through Thornvale's shattered windows, illuminating stone stained with blood and sacrifice and the cost of transformation. The Iron Duke was dead, but the man who remained, scarred, exhausted, finally willing to trust, was infinitely more dangerous because he had nothing left to lose and everything worth fighting for. And the kingdom was about to learn that sometimes the most terrifying thing was not power through fear, it was power through love wielded by someone who just discovered what love actually meant. The war room filled with tension that felt nothing like the violence that preceded it. Northern lords gathered around the oak table, their faces carrying exhaustion and wariness and the complicated awareness that everything just changed in ways none of them fully understood yet. Lord Brennan stood near the window, weathered and guilt-ridden. Lord Matthias leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, watching Caedric with the careful assessment of someone recalculating allegiances. Lord Carvon positioned himself beside his daughter, protective instinct barely concealed beneath diplomatic posture. Cedric entered last, Isolde at his side, and the room fell silent. He looked different now, still carried the scars and the discipline and the gray eyes that missed nothing. But something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface. The Iron Duke walked with the weight of a man who just discovered that surviving was not the same thing as living, and living required accepting that some weights could not be carried alone. He moved to the head of the table but did not sit. Standing felt more honest somehow, less like claiming authority and more like accepting responsibility. Morcant is retreating south with what remains of his forces, Caedric said without preamble. Our scouts estimate he lost 8,000 men between the siege and the counterattack. His political position in the capital is likely destroyed. Parliament will distance themselves from a failed regent, and the Crown Council will need someone to blame for the disaster. Good, Matthias said flatly. Let him burn. He will burn, but burning him does not solve the fundamental problem. Caedric placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. The crown will send someone else. Maybe not immediately, maybe not with armies. But eventually, someone will try again because centralized power always attempts to consume autonomous territories. Brennan spoke carefully, guilt still coloring his voice. Then what do you propose, Your Grace? I propose we stop pretending the North can remain independent while still claiming allegiance to a crown that views us as resources to exploit. Cedric straightened, meeting each lord's eyes in turn. We declare formal independence. Not through rebellion, but through the reality that we just defeated a crown-backed army and proved we can defend our territories without Southern support. Silence crashed through the room. Lord Carvane cleared his throat. That is treason. That is survival, Caedric corrected. Morcant came north because the crown believed it could control us through force and political manipulation. We proved otherwise. Now we formalize what everyone already knows. The North governs itself, or it burns anyone who tries to govern it. The king will never accept— The king is 12 years old, Caedric interrupted. He accepts what the Crown Council tells him to accept. And right now, the Crown Council is facing the reality that they just lost 8,000 men and a regent trying to subjugate territories that feed half the kingdom. They need us more than we need them. We leverage that reality into terms that preserve our autonomy. Matthias pushed off the wall, moving closer. You want to negotiate from a position of strength while they are still reeling from defeat. I want to establish that northern territories are allied with the crown, not subservient to it. We pay reasonable taxes. We contribute soldiers for genuine threats to the kingdom, but we govern ourselves, maintain our own military forces, and answer to northern councils instead of southern bureaucrats. Hedrick's voice remained steady, certain. And if they refuse those terms, we prepare for the next war because it will come eventually anyway. Brennan looked at the other lords, gauging their reactions. This is a significant departure from how things have been done for 6 generations. 6 generations built on the assumption that fear and control were the only paths to stability, Hedrick said quietly. I spent 14 years ruling that way. It nearly destroyed everything I tried to protect. So yes, this is different. It requires trust and cooperation, and accepting that power shared is sometimes stronger than power hoarded. The old lord studied Hedrick's face, seeing something there that had not existed 3 months ago. You have changed, Your Grace. I was forced to change or die. I chose change. Because of her, Matthias said, nodding toward Isolde. Because of her, Hedrick agreed without hesitation. She showed me that isolation was not strength. It was just slow suicide disguised as discipline. Isolde's hand found his beneath the table, squeezing gently. Lord Carvain spoke next, his tone carrying the weight of a father who just watched his daughter survive something that should have killed her. If we formalize northern independence, you become the de facto ruler of these territories. That is a tremendous amount of power for one person, especially given your history of wielding power through intimidation. Which is why I am proposing we establish a Northern Council, Hedrick said. Representatives from each major house. Collective governance with me as military commander, but not absolute authority. Checks on power, accountability, everything I refused to accept when I thought control meant owning every decision. The room erupted into conversation. Lords debated logistics and risks and the terrifying prospect of fundamentally restructuring how northern territories functioned. Hedrick let them talk, watching the dynamics shift and reform, seeing alliances recalibrate in real time. This was what leadership actually looked like when stripped of fear. Messy, complicated, requiring patience and compromise, and the willingness to hear perspectives that contradicted your own certainty. Eventually, Brennan called for order. We need time to consider these proposals, and we need to address the other matter in this room. Every eye turned toward the old lord. Several of us betrayed Duke Thornvale to Morcant, Brennan continued, his voice steady despite obvious shame. Some through coercion, some through promises, some through simple calculation that opposing the regent was suicide. Regardless of motivation, we compromised the Northern Alliance and nearly got everyone killed. That requires consequences. The tension ratcheted up 10 degrees. Hedrick looked at Brennan, seeing the old man ready to accept whatever judgment came. He looked at the other lords who avoided his gaze, caught between relief at surviving and fear about what came next. And he thought about Corwin, still imprisoned below, waiting to learn whether his betrayal earned execution or understanding. I'm going to tell you something I learned recently, Hedrick said quietly. Power through fear only lasts until someone offers better terms. I built an empire on intimidation, and when tested, it collapsed because no one actually chose to follow me. They just obeyed because disobedience was dangerous. He moved around the table slowly, deliberately, making eye contact with each lord. You betrayed me because Morcant threatened things you valued more than northern independence. Families, lives, futures. I cannot blame you for that because I understand exactly what it means to make terrible choices to protect what matters. Hedrick stopped, looking at Brennan directly. So here are the consequences. You live. You keep your titles. You remain part of the Northern Council. But from now on, when threats come, and they will come, you bring them to this council instead of handling them alone. We face them together or we fail together. No more isolated decision-making. No more individual vulnerabilities exploited because no one knew help was available. Brennan's expression cracked. Your Grace, I am not finished. Hedrick's voice hardened slightly. This mercy has conditions. You earn back trust through action, not words. You prove that collective strength is more valuable than individual survival. And if any of you betray this council again, the consequences will be absolute. I am offering second chances, not infinite forgiveness." Silence held the room while lords processed the reality that they were being given something they did not expect and possibly did not deserve. Finally, Matthias spoke, voice rough. "Why? Why spare us when you have every right to execute traitors?" "Because someone taught me that understanding fear and desperation does not make you weak. It makes you capable of building alliances that actually last." Kadric glanced at Isolde. "And because ruling through vengeance just creates the next generation of betrayals waiting to happen." The meeting continued for 3 more hours, working through logistics and political strategy and the complicated architecture of building governance that did not rely on one person's absolute control. By the time lords began departing, exhaustion hung heavy in the air, but so did something else. Hope, maybe. Or at least the possibility that the North could become something other than territories held together through fear and brutal efficiency. After everyone left, Caedric remained standing at the table, staring at maps that represented thousands of lives depending on whether he could actually transform from weapon to leader. Isolde approached from behind, wrapping arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his back. "You did the right thing. I did the necessary thing. Whether it was right remains to be seen. You showed mercy when everyone expected execution. That matters." Caedric turned in her embrace, pulling her close, needing the contact more than breathing. "I am terrified I am going to fail them. That all of this, the council, the independence, the trust, is going to collapse and prove that I was right to rule through fear, because fear at least keeps people alive." "Fear keeps people obedient," Isolde corrected. "Trust keeps them loyal. There is a difference. And if I cannot learn that difference fast enough, then we fail together and figure out what comes next." She looked up at him, dark eyes serious. "You're not alone anymore, Caedric. Stop trying to carry everything yourself." He kissed her slowly, deeply, pouring 14 years of isolation and 3 months of transformation into the contact. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said quietly. Isolde went completely still. "What?" "Marry me. Not for political alliance, not for strategic advantage. Marry me because I am choosing you freely, and I want you to choose me the same way." Caedric's hands cupped her face. "Marry me because I love you, and I am done pretending that love is weakness instead of the only thing that makes any of this worthwhile." Tears spilled down Isolde's cheeks. "You manipulative, terrifying, impossible man. You ask me this now? After everything?" "I ask you this now because of everything. Because you walked into my fortress and destroyed every defense I built. Because you showed me that being human was not something to fear. Because you stayed when every intelligent instinct should have told you to run." His voice roughened. "Because I cannot imagine surviving what comes next without you." Isolde laughed through tears, the sound breaking and reforming into something bright. "Yes, obviously yes. Did you think I would say anything else after threatening to burn down the capital looking for you?" "I hoped. Hoping is new for me." She kissed him hard enough to bruise, fierce and claiming and absolutely certain. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Isolde smiled with the kind of joy that made Caedric's chest ache. "Your political advisors are going to hate this decision," she said. "My political advisors can learn to adjust or find new employment. Your northern lords are going to question whether your judgment is compromised. Let them question. I am done making decisions based on what other people think I should prioritize." Isolde's smile softened into something more serious. "And what do you prioritize now, Your Grace?" Caedric looked at her. This woman who somehow saw past the violence and control to the person underneath who just wanted to protect something without destroying it in the process. "You, Thornvale, building something that lasts, in that order." "Good answer." They stood together in the war room as afternoon light faded to evening, holding each other while outside Thornvale began the slow process of healing from siege and betrayal and transformation. The next morning, Caedric descended to the cells where Lord Corwin waited. The imprisoned lord looked older than he had days earlier, worn down by guilt and fear and the grinding awareness that he traded information for his daughter's safety and nearly got everyone killed in the process. He stood when Kaedric entered, posture somewhere between defiant and resigned. "Have you come to execute me?" Corwin asked flatly. "I've come to offer you a choice." Kedrick remained near the door, maintaining distance. "Your daughter is still held in the capital. Morkont's forces are retreating in chaos. Now is the optimal time to extract her before someone else uses her as leverage." Confusion crossed Corwin's face. "I do not understand." "I am sending a team south to rescue her. Captain Thorne will lead. They will infiltrate the capital, locate your daughter, and bring her north to safety." Kedrick's voice remained steady, clinical. "In exchange, you will serve the Northern Council honestly. No more divided loyalties. No more individual decisions made under coercion. You bring threats to the Council and we handle them collectively." Corwin stared at him like he was hallucinating. "Why would you do this?" "Because I understand what it means to make terrible choices to protect what matters. Because punishing you for being human serves no strategic purpose. And because Isolde convinced me that mercy is sometimes stronger than vengeance." Kaedric moved closer. "But understand this, Corwin. If you betray the Northern Council again, I will not offer second chances. The mercy I am showing now is contingent on you proving it was not wasted." The older lord's expression cracked completely. Tears spilled down weathered cheeks as he nodded, unable to speak through the emotion. Kedrick turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Your daughter will be home within 2 weeks. Use that time to decide what kind of man you want to be when she arrives." He left Corwin weeping in relief and climbed back to the castle proper, where preparations for multiple crises continued simultaneously. Messengers departed for the capital carrying carefully worded letters to Parliament. Scouts mapped Morkont's retreat. Builders assessed siege damage. Thornvale transformed from battlefield to functional fortress through sheer momentum of people who refused to let destruction be the final word. Kedrick found Isolde in what remained of the gardens, standing among broken trellises and frozen flower beds that would bloom again come spring. She wore heavy wool against the cold, her breath misting in frigid air, looking at damage that somehow felt less permanent than it had days earlier. "I sent the rescue team for Corwin's daughter," Kedrick said, moving to stand beside her. "I know, Thorne told me." Isolde glanced at him. "You are becoming dangerously soft, Your Grace." "I am becoming strategic about what strength actually means." "Is that what you're calling it?" "That is what I'm hoping it becomes." They stood in silence for a moment, watching servants clear debris and begin the slow work of restoration. Around them, Thornvale breathed with the complicated rhythm of a place that survived something it should not have and was still processing what survival cost. "I have been thinking about what happens next," Isolde said quietly. "After the independence negotiations, after the Northern Council establishes governance, after everything stabilizes into whatever our new normal becomes." "And what did you conclude?" "That you are going to struggle." She turned to face him fully. "You spent 14 years being one thing. Transforming into something else does not happen overnight. There will be moments when the old instincts return, when control and isolation feel safer than trust and cooperation, when you want to handle everything alone because depending on others terrifies you." Kedrick said nothing because she was absolutely right. "So I need you to promise me something," Isolde continued. "When those moments come, and they will come, you do not retreat back into the Iron Duke. You stay present. You ask for help. You remember that transformation is not a single decision, it is 1,000 small choices made every day to be something different than what you were. And if I fail, if the old patterns are too strong, then I remind you why you changed in the first place." Isolde took his hand, squeezing hard. "And you keep trying. That is all any of us can do. Keep trying until the new patterns become stronger than the old ones." Kedrick pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, feeling the weight of everything settle across his shoulders in ways that felt less crushing than it did alone. "I do not deserve you." "Probably not, but you are stuck with me anyway." "Good." They remained in the broken gardens while Thornvale rebuilt around them. Two people who found each other in the worst possible circumstances, and somehow made those circumstances into something worth surviving. 3 weeks later, Parliament sent representatives to negotiate northern independence. The meetings took place in Thornvale's Great Hall, which had been repaired enough to function but still carried scars from Morcant's siege. Burn-marked stained walls. Some windows remained boarded. The northern lords insisted on keeping the damage visible as a reminder of what happened when the crown tried to subjugate territories through force. The lead negotiator was a woman named Lady Vesper, 60 years old, former military commander turned political operative, with the kind of sharp eyes that suggested she did not miss details. She entered flanked by advisors and guards, studied the damaged hall with professional assessment, then turned her attention to Cadric. "Duke Thornvale," she said formally. "Parliament sends greetings and condolences for the unfortunate conflict that occurred." "Parliament can keep their condolences," Cadric replied, tone flat. "We are here to negotiate terms of northern autonomy, not exchange diplomatic pleasantries about an invasion they sanctioned." Lady Vesper's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes that might have been respect. "Very well. Let us speak plainly. The Crown cannot afford another war in the north. You demonstrated military capability and political coordination that surprised everyone in the capital. Parliament is prepared to offer concessions in exchange for continued alliance with the kingdom." "What concessions?" "Reduced taxation, greater autonomy in local governance, a seat on the Crown Council for northern representation." "Not enough." "Then what do you want?" Kedrick leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Full independence in everything except military alliance. Northern territories govern themselves completely. We maintain our own armies, collect our own taxes, and answer to northern councils instead of southern bureaucrats. In exchange, we contribute soldiers for genuine threats to the kingdom and maintain trade relationships at negotiated rates. You are asking for sovereign status while remaining part of the kingdom. That is unprecedented. So was defeating a crown-backed army with 15,000 men. Precedent is flexible when circumstances demand it." Lady Vesper studied him for a long moment. "Parliament will never agree to those terms." "Then Parliament can send another army north and see how that turns out." Kedrick's voice remained calm, almost casual. "But before they do, remind them that 8,000 men died last time. Remind them that northern territories feed half the kingdom, and losing that food supply would create famines in the south. And remind them that I am offering alliance instead of outright rebellion, which is significantly more generous than they deserve." The negotiations continued for 5 days. Parliament pushed back on every point. Cadric refused to compromise on autonomy. Lady Vesper threatened. Cadric called the bluffs. The northern lords watched their duke transform political negotiations into extended siege warfare, grinding down opposition through patience and the absolute unwillingness to accept anything less than what he demanded. On the 5th day, Lady Vesper agreed to terms that gave northern territories de facto independence while maintaining nominal alliance with the crown. The agreement was signed in Thornvale's Great Hall with the northern lords bearing witness. Cadric's signature on the document felt less like surrender and more like liberation from a relationship that never served the North's actual interests. After Lady Vesper departed with her delegation, Lord Brennan approached Cadric with an expression somewhere between admiration and concern. "You just fundamentally restructured the kingdom's political architecture," the old lord said quietly. "I just formalized what already existed," Cadric corrected. "The North has been functionally independent for generations. We just stopped pretending otherwise. And when the young king comes of age and decides he wants to reclaim territories his regency signed away, then he will learn the same lesson Morcant learned, that some territories cost more to conquer than they are worth keeping." Cadric moved toward the window overlooking the valley. "But I suspect he will be smarter than that. The agreement benefits both sides. We get autonomy. The crown gets stable food supplies and military support without the cost of garrisoning northern territories. Everyone wins if they are intelligent enough to maintain the arrangement." Brennan nodded slowly. "You have changed, Your Grace. Profoundly." "I had to. The alternative was dying as the Iron Duke, isolated and brittle and ultimately irrelevant." Kedrick glanced at the old lord. "Do you regret your decision to support this council?" "No. Though I confess I expected you to rule it like you ruled Thornvale, with absolute authority and little patience for dissent. I considered that approach. Then I realized that repeating the same patterns would produce the same results. If I want something different, I need to be something different. Kedrick smiled slightly. That is significantly harder than it sounds. Yes, but worth the effort. I hope so. That evening, Kedrick found Isolde in their chambers, which had been moved to rooms that did not carry memories of siege and surrender. She was reading correspondence by firelight, hair loose around her shoulders, looking more relaxed than he had seen her in weeks. Parliament agreed to terms, Kedrick said from the doorway. Isolde looked up, smile spreading slowly. I heard. The North is independent. The North is autonomous within alliance. It is a distinction that matters to diplomats. It is a distinction that buys us the space to build something better than what existed before. She set aside the correspondence. How does it feel? Kedrick moved into the room, closing the door behind him. Strange. For 14 years I fought to maintain control over everything. Now I negotiated away absolute authority, and it feels like winning instead of losing. That is because you are finally understanding that control is not the same thing as security. Isolde stood, crossing to him. Control is what you force. Security is what you build through trust and cooperation. You spent so long confusing the two. He pulled her close, needing the contact, letting himself have this moment of vulnerability without the weight of guards or councils or political calculations pressing down. I am terrified that I'm going to fail at this new version of leadership, that the council will collapse, that the independence I just negotiated will fall apart when tested, that I traded brutal efficiency for chaos and weakness. Then we fail together and rebuild from whatever remains. Isolde looked up at him. But I think you are underestimating yourself. You survived 14 years of isolation through sheer discipline. Now imagine what you can accomplish when that discipline serves connection instead of control. You make it sound simple. It is not simple. It is brutally difficult. But you are capable of difficult things, Kedrick. You just spent weeks proving that. He kissed her, slow and deep, memorizing the taste and feel, accepting that this woman somehow saw the person he was trying to become and believed in him more than he believed in himself. When they broke apart, Isolde's expression turned serious. I received a letter from my father today. What did he say? That he is proud of me for choosing you despite knowing exactly what that choice would cost, and that he expects us to visit soon because apparently witnessing near-death experiences makes him sentimental about seeing his daughter alive and happy. She paused. He also mentioned that the southern houses are watching what happens in the north very carefully. Watching for what? To see if autonomy through alliance actually works. If it does, several southern territories are considering similar arrangements with the crown. Isolde smiled slightly. You may have accidentally started a political revolution, Your Grace. Kedrick absorbed that information, considering implications that stretched far beyond northern borders. If the model they just created spread, it would fundamentally transform how the kingdom functioned. Centralized control replaced by federated alliance, power distributed instead of concentrated. It was either visionary or catastrophically naive, and he had no idea which until circumstances revealed the answer. Then we better make this work, he said finally, because if it fails, we take down more than just the North. No pressure, just moderate existential dread. Isolde laughed, the sound bright against the weight of responsibility they both carried. Welcome to the rest of our lives, Kedrick. Crisis management and difficult decisions with occasional moments of happiness in between. I can work with that. They spent the evening making plans for a wedding that would double as political statement, discussing logistics and guest lists and the complicated architecture of building a life together while simultaneously building a government structure that might actually work. Outside, Thornvale settled into winter routines. Guards patrolled. Civilians went about their business. The castle that nearly fell now stood as symbol of something more complicated than simple military victory. It stood as proof that transformation was possible, even for people convinced they were too broken to change. 6 weeks later, Kedrick and Isolde married in Thornvale's Great Hall. The ceremony was simple, stripped of excessive formality, witnessed by northern lords and southern allies and common soldiers who fought during the siege. Ceadric wore black as always, but Isolde had convinced him to include silver thread in the embroidery because apparently symbolism mattered even when you were trying to avoid excessive ceremony. Isolde wore deep blue velvet that matched the dress she arrived in months earlier, a deliberate choice that acknowledged how far they had traveled since that first meeting. Lord Carvain performed the binding, his voice carrying across the hall with the weight of a father watching his daughter marry. Someone he was not entirely certain deserved her, but had at least proven himself capable of transformation. When the ceremony concluded and Ceadric kissed his wife for the first time as married partners, the hall erupted in applause that felt less like celebration and more like collective relief that something good emerged from months of violence and political chaos. The feast that followed was excessive by northern standards, which meant adequate food and good wine and entertainment that did not embarrass anyone. Lords mingled with soldiers. Southern houses toasted northern independence. Enemies who fought weeks earlier found common ground in the shared experience of surviving circumstances that should have killed them. Late in the evening, after most guests had retreated to quarters or collapsed into wine-induced unconsciousness, Ceadric found himself alone on the battlements with his wife. They stood together watching stars emerge above Thornvale, breathing cold air that tasted like winter and possibility, feeling the complicated weight of everything they built and everything that came before and everything still waiting ahead. "What are you thinking?" Isolde asked quietly. Ceadric considered the question. "I'm thinking that 6 months ago I stood in this exact spot planning how to maintain absolute control over territories through fear and brutal efficiency. Now I am standing here married to someone who systematically destroyed that control and somehow convinced me it was liberation instead of weakness. Regrets? None. Terror about the future, yes. Regrets, no." Isolde leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "What terrifies you most?" "That I will fail everyone depending on me. That the independence I negotiated will collapse. That the trust I am building with the Northern Council will shatter when tested." He paused. "That I will revert to old patterns when crisis comes and prove that transformation was temporary performance instead of fundamental change. Those are reasonable fears. You are supposed to reassure me that my fears are unfounded. I'm not going to lie to you, Ceadric. Those things might happen. You might fail. The independence might collapse. Old patterns might resurface." Isolde pulled back slightly, looking up at him. "But you know what I have learned about you these past months? You do not quit. You adapt. You survive. And when you fail, you figure out how to fail forward instead of just collapsing." "Fail forward?" "Transform failure into information that makes you stronger next time. That is what you did with Morkant's siege. That is what you did with the betrayals. That is what you have been doing your entire life. You just called it something else." She touched his face gently. "So yes, you will probably fail sometimes. And when you do, we will handle it together and figure out what comes next." Ceadric kissed her forehead, accepting the truth that success was not about avoiding failure. It was about having people beside you who refused to let failure be the end of the story. They remained on the battlements until cold drove them inside, then retreated to chambers where the rest of their wedding night waited with all the complicated intimacy that came from choosing each other freely after surviving circumstances that should have destroyed them both. Months passed and transformed into years. The Northern Council established governance that was messy and argumentative and somehow functional. Ceadric learned to lead through consensus instead of decree, accepting that collective decisions took longer, but carried more weight than anything he could force alone. Lord Corwin's daughter arrived safely from the capital, and her father spent years rebuilding trust through consistent loyalty. The independence agreement with the crown held despite periodic challenges from nobles who resented autonomous territories. Southern houses watched the northern model, and several negotiated similar arrangements, fundamentally restructuring the kingdom's political architecture in ways that historians would debate for generations. Ceadric and Isolde had 3 children who inherited their father's gray eyes and their mother's ability to see through defensive walls. Thornvale transformed from fortress built on fear into something more complicated, a home that contained both strength and vulnerability, discipline and compassion, the acknowledgement that power used wisely looked nothing like power used brutally. Some nights, Kadric still woke from nightmares about his parents' murders, still felt the pull toward isolation and control, still questioned whether transformation was real or just performance he maintained through constant effort. But those moments grew less frequent as years accumulated evidence that the person he became was more sustainable than the weapon he used to be. On the 14th anniversary of his father's death, Kadric stood alone on Thornvale's battlements at dawn, watching sun rise over territories that survived because he finally learned that protection did not require ownership. Isolde found him there, as she always did during these annual rituals of remembering. She did not speak immediately, just stood beside him, her presence steady and grounding. "Do you think your father would approve of what you built?" she asked eventually. Kadric considered the question. "No, my father believed in absolute authority and ruling through strength. He would view the council as weakness and the independence agreement as surrender." "And do you agree with him?" "I did for 14 years. Spent all that time trying to honor his memory by being exactly what he taught me to be." Kadric looked at his wife. "Then you showed me that honoring the dead does not mean repeating their mistakes. It means learning from what they could not and building something better." "That is very philosophical for dawn on a cold morning. I am married to someone who forced me to develop philosophy beyond brutal efficiency." Isolde smiled, leaning into him. "You are welcome." They stood together as light spread across the valley, illuminating a fortress that had seen violence and betrayal and transformation, that had fallen and risen and learned that strength was not about refusing to break, but about choosing how to rebuild when breaking was inevitable. Behind them, Thornvale breathed with the rhythm of a place that understood survival was not about avoiding damage. It was about accepting damage as part of existence and healing anyway, stronger in the broken places because the breaking taught lessons that untested strength never learned. Kadric thought about the Iron Duke who stood on these same battlements 14 years earlier, convinced that isolation was protection and control was survival. That man was dead, killed not by enemies but by the realization that the fortress he built around himself was also a prison. In his place stood someone more complicated, still scarred, still carrying the weight of decisions that haunted him, but also connected, trusted, choosing daily to be human instead of weapon. And that choice, that constant, difficult, never-finished choice to transform, was what real power looked like when stripped of everything except the courage to keep trying despite knowing you would never fully succeed. The sun rose higher, warming stone that had stood for 6 generations and would stand for 6 more. Not because it was invincible, but because the people defending it understood that some things were worth protecting even when protection required changing everything you thought you knew about strength. Far below, Thornvale's gates opened. Merchants entered. Soldiers changed guard. Children played in courtyards while their parents worked. Life continued the way it always did, ordinary and precious, and completely dependent on choices made by people who had power and chose daily not to wield it as weapon. Kadric took his wife's hand, feeling her pulse steady against his palm, and together they descended from the battlements to begin another day of the difficult, messy, infinitely worthwhile work of leading people who trusted them enough to follow freely. The Iron Duke was dead. But the man who remained, scarred and learning and choosing love over fear every single day, despite how terrifying that choice remained, was exactly who he was always supposed to become. And that, finally, was enough.